Story 1. The Mirror Rig. Jake Holloway had been driving 18-wheelers for 23 years, hauling everything from automotive parts to refrigerated goods across the continental United States. He'd seen his share of strange things on the road. Peculiar hitchhikers, unexplained lights in the sky, animals that shouldn't exist in certain regions. But nothing prepared him for what happened on Interstate 80 through Nebraska in October 2019. It was a Tuesday night around 2:47 a.m., according to his dashboard clock. Jake was hauling a load of industrial machinery from Chicago to Salt Lake City, running slightly behind schedule due to construction delays outside of Des Moines. The highway stretched out before him like a black ribbon, illuminated only by his headlights and the occasional reflective road sign. The moon was new, leaving the prairie darkness absolute beyond the reach of his truck's LED beams. His CB radio crackled with the usual late-night chatter, other drivers complaining about fuel prices, discussing rest-stop coffee quality, sharing information about speed traps and weather conditions ahead. Jake had his thermos of black coffee wedged between his seat and the center console, and he was listening to a true crime podcast through his phone speaker, keeping his mind engaged during the monotonous stretch of highway. That's when he first noticed the other truck in his mirrors. It appeared suddenly, as if materializing from the darkness itself. One moment his mirrors showed nothing but empty highway behind him. The next moment, there it was. A Peterbilt 379, classic long nose, appearing to be the same deep blue color as his own rig. Jake couldn't make out the trailer type in the darkness, but the running lights suggested it was roughly the same length as his 53-foot dry van. What struck him immediately as odd was the distance. The truck was maintaining an exact following distance, staying precisely 3 car lengths behind him. Jake had been driving long enough to know that most truckers varied their following distance naturally, adjusting for road conditions, speed changes, and personal comfort. This truck stayed locked in position with an almost mechanical precision. Jake adjusted his speed, slowing from 73 to 68 miles per hour. The truck behind him slowed proportionally, maintaining that exact 3-car length gap. He accelerated back to 75. The truck matched him perfectly. The synchronization was so precise, it seemed impossible for a human driver to maintain. He grabbed his CB radio microphone. "Hey there, driver behind me on the westbound 80, about mile marker 312. You got your ears on?" Static answered him. He tried again, adjusting the channel. "Breaker, breaker. This is the blue Peterbilt hauling machinery, looking for the blue Peterbilt behind me. You copying?" Nothing but the soft hiss of empty airwaves. Jake felt the first tickle of unease creep up his spine. He'd been in situations where other drivers didn't respond. Maybe they were on different channels. Maybe their radio was off. Maybe they just didn't feel like talking. But something about this felt different. The precision of the following distance, the complete radio silence, the way the truck had appeared so suddenly in his mirrors. He decided to test something. At the next exit, mile marker 316, Jake put on his turn signal and began to move toward the off-ramp. He watched his mirrors carefully. The truck behind him activated its turn signal at the exact same moment, not a second earlier or later, and followed him toward the exit. Jake's heart rate increased. He canceled his turn signal and merged back onto the highway at the last possible second, his truck's tires briefly touching the rumble strips. In his mirror, The blue Peterbilt behind him cancelled its own signal at precisely the same instant and merged back onto the highway, maintaining that perfect 3-car length distance. "What the hell?" Jake muttered, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. He tried varying his speed erratically, speeding up to 80, slowing down to 60, speeding back up to 75. The truck behind him matched every change with inhuman precision. He tried switching lanes. The truck switched with him, maintaining perfect alignment. When Jake moved to the left lane, the truck moved to the left lane. When he returned to the right, so did his follower. The unease Jake felt was transforming into genuine fear. He'd been on these highways long enough to recognize when something was fundamentally wrong. This wasn't just another driver messing with him or some strange coincidence. The mathematical precision of the movements, the perfect synchronization, the complete radio silence, it all added up to something deeply unnatural. He grabbed his phone and called his dispatcher, a woman named Rita, who'd been coordinating his loads for 7 years. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried his wife. Voicemail. He tried his brother, who lived in Oregon and was usually up late. Voicemail. Jake looked at his phone screen. Full signal strength. Battery at 68%, but somehow unable to connect any calls. The highway ahead remained empty. Jake hadn't seen another vehicle. No cars, no other trucks, nothing, since the blue Peterbilt had appeared behind him. It was as if they were alone on this stretch of road, isolated in a bubble of highway that contained only the two of them. That's when Jake noticed something that made his blood run cold. In his passenger side mirror, he could see the truck behind him clearly now. The angle and distance were perfect for him to make out details. The cab was identical to his own. Same model Peterbilt 379. Same blue paint. Same chrome detailing on the grille. But more than that, he could see the driver's side window of the truck behind him, and through it, illuminated by the dashboard lights, he could see the driver. The driver was him. Not someone who looked like him. Not a person of similar build or appearance. It was Jake Holloway, wearing the same red flannel shirt he had on, the same black baseball cap, the same gray beard, the same tired eyes. The driver behind him was an exact duplicate, moving in perfect synchronization with his own movements. Jake's hands began to shake. He rubbed his eyes, convinced he was experiencing some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion or bad coffee or carbon monoxide from a leak in his exhaust system. But when he looked again, the driver behind him was still there, still him, still maintaining that perfect following distance. He pressed the accelerator to the floor. His truck surged forward, the engine roaring as the speedometer climbed past 85, past 90, past 95 miles per hour. The truck shuddered with the speed, the load behind him swaying slightly as the aerodynamics became unstable. In his mirror, the other truck accelerated in perfect unison, the gap between them never varying by so much as an inch. Jake slammed on his brakes. The anti-lock system engaged with a rapid pulsing sensation through the pedal, and his truck decelerated hard, the seatbelt tightening across his chest. Behind him, the other truck braked at the exact same moment, with the exact same force, maintaining that impossible gap. "This isn't real," Jake said aloud, his voice shaking. "This can't be real." He tried the CB radio again, cycling through all 40 channels, calling out for anyone, any voice, any confirmation that he wasn't completely alone out here. Every channel was silent, except for a soft static that almost sounded like breathing. Mile marker 334. Passed. Then 335. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, straight as an arrow through the flat Nebraska prairie. No other vehicles appeared. No buildings or structures broke the darkness beyond the road. It was as if the entire world had been reduced to this single strip of asphalt, these two trucks, and the void surrounding them. Jake noticed something else. The mile markers weren't progressing normally. He'd passed 385, but then he saw 334 again, then 333. He was going backward, though his speedometer showed 72 miles per hour forward motion. The truck responded normally to his controls. The engine sound matched his speed. The road vibration felt right, but somehow he was moving in reverse along the highway sequence. The podcast on his phone had stopped. The screen showed the app was still running, the progress bar moving forward, but no sound emerged from the speaker. His CB radio's display flickered, channels changing randomly without his input, the green digits becoming increasingly erratic. That's when the truck behind him started closing the distance. Slowly at first, the 3-car length gap becoming 2.5 lengths, then 2 lengths. The change was gradual but relentless, the mirror image of himself drawing closer and closer to his trailer. Jake accelerated. The other truck accelerated more. He could see the duplicate version of himself in the other cab now, with terrible clarity. The same concerned expression on his face. The same white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. The same fear in his eyes. 1.5 car lengths, 1 length. The truck behind him was close enough now that Jake could read the license plate in his mirror. It was his license plate, his registration, his dot number displayed on the door. 1/2 car length. Jake made a decision born of pure panic. He cranked the steering wheel hard to the right, sending his truck off the highway and onto the shoulder. Gravel sprayed from his tires, his truck lurching violently as it hit the unpaved surface. He fought to maintain control, the steering wheel bucking in his hands as the shoulder transitioned to grass and then rougher terrain. In his mirror, the other truck followed him onto the shoulder at the exact same angle, hitting the gravel at the exact same point. Jake's truck plowed through a section of prairie grass, the cab bouncing and shaking, warning lights illuminating on his dashboard. He could feel the trailer behind him starting to lose traction, the whole rig threatening to jackknife. He eased off the accelerator, trying to bring the vehicle under control. And that's when the other truck made contact. The impact was gentle, almost tender. Just a soft bump as the front of the mirror truck touched the rear of Jake's trailer. But the moment contact was made, everything changed. The darkness outside became absolute. His headlights still shone, but they illuminated nothing. Not the ground, not the air. Just an impenetrable blackness that seemed to absorb the light. His engine was running, but he could hear a second engine perfectly synchronized with his own. The two sounds overlapping so precisely, they became one. Jake looked in his mirrors and saw that the truck behind him was no longer just similar to his. It was occupying the same space. The two trucks were overlapping, phasing through each other like ghosts, the physical boundaries between them dissolving. He could see through his own trailer to the cab behind him, see the duplicate version of himself also looking back, their eyes meeting across the impossible geometry. The other Jake's mouth moved, speaking words that Jake somehow heard inside his own head. This happened to me too, and to the one before me, and the one before that. We're all Jake Holloway. We're all on this highway. We're all trying to outrun ourselves. Jake felt his identity fragmenting, multiplying, as memories that weren't his flooded into his consciousness. He remembered this happening 23 times before. He remembered being the truck behind, chasing himself. He remembered the moment of merger, the splitting, the endless cycle repeating on this stretch of highway. He tried to scream, but the sound came out of both his mouth and the mouth of the Jake behind him, the two voices perfectly synchronized. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. Jake's truck burst back onto the highway at mile marker 340. His headlights illuminated normal pavement, normal road signs, normal darkness. His phone rang. It was Rita, his dispatcher, returning his call. His CB radio crackled with normal traffic. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance ahead of him, a normal car driving at normal speed in the opposite direction. Jake pulled his truck onto the shoulder and stopped, his whole body shaking. He checked his mirrors. The highway behind him was empty. No blue Peterbilt, no mirror image. Just normal, empty highway, stretching back into the darkness. He answered the phone. Rita asked if everything was okay. She said he'd called her 3 hours ago, but hadn't left a message. 3 hours. Jake looked at his dashboard clock. It showed 5:52 a.m. The last time he'd checked, it had been 2:47 a.m. 3 hours and 5 minutes had passed, but he'd experienced what felt like only 40 minutes. Jake completed his delivery to Salt Lake City, but he never drove that section of Interstate 80 again. He specifically requested routes that kept him away from Nebraska entirely. When other drivers asked why, he couldn't explain it in a way that made sense. But sometimes, late at night, when he's driving empty stretches of highway, Jake checks his mirrors with a compulsive frequency that his fellow drivers find odd. He's looking for that blue Peterbilt, for that impossible following distance, for that mirror image of himself. And sometimes, just for a moment, before he blinks and it's gone, he sees it there, 3 car lengths back, maintaining perfect distance, driven by a man who looks exactly like him and who knows exactly what it's like to be chased by yourself on an endless highway with no beginning and no end. Story 2. The Broadcast. Maria Castellanos had been a long-haul trucker for 16 years, and she prided herself on her professionalism and reliability. At 41 years old, she ran a small independent operation, owning her own Freightliner Cascadia and contracting with various shipping companies for loads that took her across the western United States. She'd developed a reputation for taking routes and schedules that other drivers avoided. Overnight runs through mountain passes, tight delivery windows that required driving through bad weather, remote destinations with minimal facilities. On the night of March 3rd, 2021, Maria was hauling a load of bottled water from a distribution center in Sacramento, California, to a warehouse in Butte, Montana. The route took her north on Interstate 5, then across on Highway 299 through the Cascade Range, then up through Oregon and into Montana on a combination of state highways and interstate. It was a 20-hour drive with minimal stops, and Maria had planned to push straight through with only brief breaks for fuel and food. She left Sacramento at 8:15 p.m., slightly ahead of schedule. The weather forecast was clear for the entire route, with temperatures dropping as she gained elevation, but no precipitation expected. Her truck was in excellent condition, She'd just completed a full service 3 days earlier, replacing filters, checking all fluids, inspecting brakes and tires, and ensuring her auxiliary systems were functioning properly. The first 5 hours of the drive were completely routine. Maria stopped for fuel at a truck stop outside of Reading, used the restroom, refilled her coffee thermos, and checked her route on her GPS. She exchanged brief pleasantries with a few other drivers in the parking lot, discussing road conditions ahead and comparing notes about recent loads. Everything was normal, professional, exactly as expected. She got back on the road at 1:34 a.m., merging onto Highway 299 eastbound. This was the section where she'd be crossing through the Cascade Range, ascending to nearly 5,000 feet before descending again into the valleys of Northern California and Southern Oregon. The highway was narrow here, 2 lanes winding through dense forest, with limited lighting and no cellular service for extended stretches. Maria's CB radio was tuned to Channel 19, the standard truckers' channel. Traffic was light. She'd heard maybe 3 or 4 other drivers in the past hour, making brief comments about speed traps or road conditions. She had her stereo playing a playlist of classic rock, volume low enough that she could still hear the CB if anyone called out. At approximately 2:17 a.m., as she was navigating a series of switchbacks climbing toward the summit, her CB radio emitted a harsh burst of static that made her wince. She reached over to adjust the squelch, assuming she was passing under some power lines or near some other source of interference. But before she could touch the dial, the static resolved into a voice. "Attention all drivers on Highway 299, the voice said. It was male, middle-aged, with a flat, effectless quality that was almost mechanical. "This is an emergency broadcast. Please acknowledge." Maria grabbed her microphone. "This is the Freightliner hauling water, eastbound 299 at mile marker 47. I copy your emergency broadcast. What's the nature of the emergency?" Static answered her. Then the voice resumed, exactly the same as before. "Attention all drivers on Highway 299. This is an emergency broadcast. Please acknowledge." The repetition was word for word identical. Same tone, same cadence, same slight emphasis on acknowledge. Maria had heard pre-recorded emergency broadcasts before, usually related to severe weather or road closures, but they typically came through on dedicated emergency channels and were clearly identified as official communications from Highway Patrol or Emergency Management. She tried responding again. "This is eastbound Freightliner at mile marker 48. I acknowledge your broadcast. Please state the nature of the emergency and your authority." The voice continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Do not stop your vehicle. Do not exit your vehicle. Do not acknowledge other drivers. Maintain current speed and heading. This message will repeat." Then it started over. "Attention all drivers on Highway 299. This is an emergency broadcast. Please acknowledge." Maria felt a prickle of unease. The instructions were contradictory, asking for acknowledgement while also instructing drivers not to acknowledge other drivers. And the tone was wrong, too controlled, too precise. Real emergency broadcasts had an urgency to them, a human quality even when they were pre-recorded. This sounded like it was being spoken by someone who understood the words, but not their meaning. She checked her GPS. According to the map, she was in a stretch of highway with no towns, no rest areas, no turn-offs for the next 23 miles. The forest pressed in close on both sides of the road, dense stands of pine and fir that appeared almost black in her headlights. The message continued to repeat, cycling through the same sequence every 90 seconds. Maria tried switching CB channels, but the broadcast was on every single one, Channel 1 through Channel 40, all carrying the same voice with the same message. Attention all drivers on Highway 299. This is an emergency broadcast. Please acknowledge. Do not stop your vehicle. Do not exit your vehicle. Do not acknowledge other drivers. Maintain current speed and heading. This message will repeat. Maria tried her cell phone, though she knew there was no service in this area. The screen showed no signal, but as she stared at it, a notification appeared. Emergency alert. She tapped it, expecting to see information about the broadcast she was hearing. Instead, the alert displayed a single sentence. Do not acknowledge other drivers. Her phone screen went black. When she pressed the power button, nothing happened. The device was completely dead, despite having been at 73% charge moments before. Okay, Maria said aloud, talking to herself as she often did during long night drives. This is weird, but there's got to be a rational explanation. Some kind of emergency services test, maybe. Or a malfunction in the radio system causing some old recording to broadcast on loop. But even as she said it, she didn't believe it. The timing was too coincidental. The broadcast starting just as she entered the most remote section of the highway. The phone dying immediately after displaying that message. The precise repetition of the broadcast across every channel. She focused on driving, maintaining a steady 55 miles per hour through the winding mountain road. Her headlights illuminated the white and yellow lane markings, the reflective mile markers, the occasional guardrail where the road curved along particularly steep drop-offs. The forest remained impenetrably dark beyond the reach of her lights. At mile marker 53, Maria saw something that made her ease off the accelerator. There was a truck stopped on the shoulder ahead, hazard lights flashing. It was a Kenworth T680, dark green, pulling what looked like a refrigerated trailer. The truck was positioned neatly on the shoulder, not at an angle that suggested a breakdown or accident, just parked as if the driver had pulled over for a routine rest stop. Maria's training and her basic human decency told her to stop and check if the driver needed assistance. A stopped truck on a remote highway could mean mechanical trouble, medical emergency, or any number of situations where another driver's help could be crucial. But the broadcast was still repeating on her CB. Do not stop your vehicle. Do not exit your vehicle. Do not acknowledge other drivers. She slowed to 30 miles per hour as she approached the stopped truck. Her headlights swept across it, and she could see now that the cab was dark. No interior lights, no movement visible through the windows. The refrigeration unit on the trailer wasn't running, which was odd if the cargo needed climate control. As Maria drew alongside the truck, she looked up at the cab. The driver's side window was down. She could see the interior clearly in her headlights. There was no one in the driver's seat, no one in the passenger seat. The cab was completely empty. Maria felt her heart rate spike. An empty truck, engine off, hazards on, stopped on the shoulder of a remote highway in the middle of the night. Where was the driver? Had they gone into the woods for some reason? Were they injured somewhere nearby? She reached for her CB microphone, intending to call out on the emergency channel. then remembered her phone was dead, and the only thing on her CB was that repeating message. She was about to pull over despite the broadcast's instructions when she saw the second truck. Another quarter-mile ahead, another truck was stopped on the shoulder. This one was a Peterbilt, white with blue striping, also with hazard lights flashing, also positioned too neatly, too deliberately, also with a dark, empty cab. Maria accelerated back to 55 miles per hour, passing the second truck. Her headlights revealed the same scenario. No driver, no signs of distress, just an empty vehicle sitting on the shoulder, as if waiting for something. The CB continued its loop. Attention all drivers on Highway 299. This is an emergency broadcast. Please acknowledge. Do not stop your vehicle. Do not exit your vehicle. Do not acknowledge other drivers. Maintain current speed and heading. This message will repeat. A third truck appeared ahead, then a fourth, then a fifth. All stopped on the shoulder, all with hazards flashing, all with dark, empty cabs. They appeared at irregular intervals, sometimes 2 or 3 in quick succession, sometimes a mile between them. Maria counted 17 stopped trucks in a 12-mile stretch of highway. The empty trucks represented millions of dollars in vehicles and cargo, abandoned in perfect condition on the side of the road. It was impossible. Economically, legally, logistically impossible. No driver would simply abandon their rig. No company would allow that many trucks to sit unattended in one location. The scenario made no sense. At mile marker 67, the nature of the stopped vehicles began to change. The first thing Maria noticed was the vehicles weren't all commercial trucks. She passed a stopped Honda Civic, hazards flashing, empty. Then a Ford F-150, also empty. A Toyota Camry, a Dodge Caravan, a BMW sedan, all sitting neatly on the shoulder, all with their hazard lights operating, all completely unoccupied. In a 2-mile stretch, Maria counted 37 stopped vehicles of all types, sizes, and apparent ages. It looked like an automotive graveyard, except everything was too orderly, too precise. The vehicles were evenly spaced, all positioned at the same angle, all with hazards flashing in perfect synchronization. Maria's hands were shaking on the steering wheel now. This wasn't an emergency services test or a radio malfunction. This was something else, something that defied explanation. She pressed harder on the accelerator, bringing her speed up to 65 miles per hour, despite the winding road. The CB broadcast changed. The voice was the same, but the message was different. Attention driver of eastbound Freightliner, hauling water, current location mile marker 71. This is an emergency broadcast. Please acknowledge. Maria's blood went cold. The broadcast was addressing her specifically. It knew her truck type, her cargo, her exact location. Do not stop your vehicle, the voice continued. Do not exit your vehicle. Do not acknowledge other drivers. Maintain current speed and heading. Additional instruction. Look at the tree line to your right at mile marker 72. Maria didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at her to keep her eyes forward, to focus on the road, to ignore the broadcast. But human curiosity is powerful, and as she approached mile marker 72, her eyes involuntarily flicked to the right, toward the dense forest. There were people standing among the trees. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, standing motionless in the darkness just beyond the reach of her headlights. She could see their silhouettes, human shapes, human sizes, arranged in rows among the pine trees. They weren't moving, weren't gesturing, just standing and watching as she drove past. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She forced her eyes back to the road, her entire body rigid with fear. She passed mile marker 73, then 74, and each time she involuntarily glanced at the tree line. The figures were there, standing in the forest, motionless sentinels observing her passage. The CB broadcast continued. Attention driver of eastbound freightliner. You have been acknowledged. Maintain current speed and heading. Do not stop your vehicle. Do not exit your vehicle. You will reach the end of this broadcast zone in 11 miles. This message will repeat. 11 miles. Maria fixed that number in her mind like a lifeline. 11 miles until something changed, until this nightmare section of highway ended. She could drive 11 miles. She could maintain control for 11 more miles. The stopped vehicles continued, now numbering in the hundreds. They lined both sides of the highway, creating a corridor of abandoned transportation, with emergency lights flashing in eerie unison. Between the vehicles, standing in the gaps, were more people. Those same motionless figures, now closer to the road, visible in the reflected light of all those hazard lamps. At mile marker 79, Maria's truck passed through a section where the figures stood directly beside the highway, just inches from the pavement. There were so many of them that they formed a solid wall of human shapes on both sides of the road. Maria kept her eyes locked forward, refusing to look directly at them. But in her peripheral vision, she could see their forms, their absolute stillness, the way her headlights seemed to pass through them as much as reflect off them. Her speedometer crept up to 70 miles per hour. The road was still winding, still dangerous at this speed, but Maria couldn't help herself. Every second on this highway felt like an eternity. Every mile marker an achievement. Mile marker 80, mile marker 81. The CB broadcast had said 11 miles from marker 74. That meant she'd be clear at marker 85. Mile marker 82. The figures in the trees had vanished. The stopped vehicles were becoming less frequent. Mile marker 83. Only a few vehicles visible now. And the forest looked normal again. Just dark trees without those impossible standing figures. Mile marker 84. Maria could see marker 85 ahead in her headlights. A quarter mile, 500 feet, 200 feet. She held her breath as she passed it, and the moment she did, everything changed. The CB radio fell silent. No more broadcast, just normal static. Her cell phone screen lit up in the cup holder, powering back on by itself, immediately showing full signal strength and a dozen missed call notifications from her dispatcher. Her stereo resumed playing, picking up exactly where it had left off in her rock music playlist. The highway ahead was empty and normal. No stopped vehicles, no figures in the trees, no emergency broadcasts. Just a regular mountain highway at 3:30 in the morning, exactly as it should be. Maria drove for another 5 miles before she trusted herself to pull over. She parked at a scenic overlook, her entire body shaking with delayed adrenaline. She called her dispatcher and told her she needed to take a break, citing fatigue. Then she sat in her cab for 45 minutes, engine idling, trying to process what had happened. She completed her delivery to Butte, then drove straight home to Sacramento. She didn't take another load for 2 weeks. When she finally returned to work, she requested routes that kept her away from Highway 299 entirely. Maria asked other drivers if they'd ever experienced anything strange on that stretch of road. Most looked at her like she was crazy. But one older driver, a man named William, who'd been trucking for 35 years, pulled her aside and spoke quietly so others wouldn't hear. "The broadcast," he said. It wasn't a question. Maria nodded. "Happened to me in '08, William said. "Same section of highway, same message. I stopped to help one of those empty trucks. Biggest mistake I ever made. Took me 6 hours to get back to my rig. And when I did, it was almost dawn. I still don't know where I was during those 6 hours, or what happened. All I know is I've got a scar on my left arm that wasn't there before. And sometimes I remember standing in those trees, watching trucks go by, unable to move or call out." He rolled up his sleeve. The scar was long and precise, running from his elbow to his wrist, too straight and geometric to be from any accident. "You did the right thing," William said. "You kept driving. You didn't stop. You didn't acknowledge. That's why you're still you." Maria never drove Highway 299 at night again. During the day, she's hauled loads across it dozens of times without incident. But after sunset, that stretch of highway belongs to something else. Something that broadcasts instructions on every CB channel and lines the roadside with empty vehicles and impossible figures standing in the trees. And Maria knows, with absolute certainty, that if she'd stopped, if she'd exited her vehicle to help or investigate or simply rest, she'd still be there, standing motionless in that forest, watching other drivers pass by, unable to move or warn them, just another figure in the trees waiting for the broadcast to find its next acknowledged driver. Story 3. The Empty Junction. Raymond Pierce was a third-generation trucker who'd spent his entire adult life on America's highways. At 56 years old, he'd accumulated over 2 million miles without a single accident. A record he was proud of and maintained through meticulous attention to safety, vehicle maintenance, and route planning. He ran a small fleet of 3 trucks, driving one himself and employing 2 younger drivers he mentored personally. His specialty was furniture transport, carefully loaded, high-value cargo that required precision handling and reliable delivery. In August 2020, Raymond was hauling a load of custom furniture from a manufacturer in High Point, North Carolina, to a luxury home development outside of Phoenix, Arizona. The route was one he'd driven perhaps 30 times before. Interstate 40 west through Tennessee, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, and into Arizona. The load was valuable, but not especially time-sensitive, and Raymond had built in extra time to account for summer weather and potential traffic delays. He'd left High Point on a Monday morning, planning a 4-day journey with overnight stops in Little Rock, Amarillo, and Albuquerque. The first 2 days went exactly as planned. Smooth roads, mild weather, uneventful rest stops. He departed Amarillo on Wednesday at 6 a.m. after a solid night's sleep and a breakfast of eggs, bacon, and strong coffee at a truck stop diner. The section of Interstate 40 through New Mexico was one Raymond particularly enjoyed. The landscape was stark but beautiful, high desert terrain with distant mesas and mountains, wide open skies, and limited development. Traffic was typically light through this region, especially during weekday mornings, and Raymond often made excellent time through this section. At approximately 10:15 a.m., Raymond needed to refuel. His GPS indicated a truck stop at exit 275, about 40 miles ahead. He'd stopped there before. It was a decent facility with clean restrooms, reasonable food, and competitive fuel prices. He adjusted his speed to ensure he'd arrive with enough fuel reserve, but without running uncomfortably low. Exit 275 appeared on schedule. Raymond put on his turn signal and took the off-ramp, The exit led to a standard interchange configuration. The ramp curved right, then met a frontage road that ran parallel to the interstate. According to Raymond's memory and his GPS, the truck stop was located half a mile north on the frontage road. He turned north and immediately noticed something odd. The truck stop wasn't visible. Raymond had been to this location multiple times, and the facility had always been clearly visible from the interstate. A large building with prominent fuel island canopies, multiple truck parking spaces, and significant signage. But as he drove up the frontage road, he saw nothing but empty desert terrain. "Must have closed down," Raymond muttered, though he was surprised he hadn't heard about it through his network of fellow drivers. Truck stops didn't close often, especially ones in strategic locations along major interstates. He checked his GPS for alternative fuel options. The device showed the next truck stop was at exit 302, about 30 miles further west. Raymond checked his fuel gauge. He had just over a quarter tank remaining, which should be sufficient to reach the next stop with a comfortable margin. He executed a U-turn on the frontage road and headed back toward the interstate entrance. That's when things started to become strange. The entrance ramp to westbound Interstate 40 wasn't where it should be. Raymond drove past the location where he'd exited, where the westbound on-ramp should have been clearly visible, but there was no ramp. The frontage road simply continued, running parallel to the interstate, with no entrance point. Raymond slowed his truck to 30 miles per hour, scanning carefully for the ramp. He could see Interstate 40 clearly, running about 100 yards to his left, elevated slightly above the frontage road on a low embankment. But there was no connecting ramp, no break in the chain-link fence that ran along the interstate's boundary. "What the hell?" Raymond said. He pulled his truck to the side of the frontage road and stopped, engaging his parking brake. He grabbed his paper atlas. Raymond always carried paper maps as backup, a habit from his early trucking days, and verified his location. According to the atlas, exit 275 should be a standard diamond interchange, 2 off-ramps and 2 on-ramps, allowing access to and from both directions of the interstate. The frontage road should provide clear access to both westbound and eastbound on-ramps. Raymond got out of his truck to get a better view. The morning was already hot, temperature probably in the mid-90s, with a steady desert wind blowing from the west. He walked to the chain-link fence and looked at Interstate 40. He could see vehicles passing in both directions, cars and trucks moving at highway speeds, completely normal traffic flow. He walked north along the fence line, looking for any kind of access point. After 200 yards, he found something that made him stop and stare. There was an entrance ramp, or rather, there had been an entrance ramp. Raymond could see the pavement, clearly visible from his vantage point, but it didn't connect to the frontage road. The ramp started at the interstate level and sloped downward, but instead of meeting the frontage road as it should, it simply ended in empty air about 15 feet above the ground. The pavement terminated in a clean edge, as if someone had taken a massive knife and cut away the lower section of the ramp. Raymond stared at the impossible geometry. Roads didn't work this way. Ramps didn't float in the air. The entire structure violated basic physics and engineering principles. He walked back to his truck, got in, and drove further north on the frontage road, looking for another access point. After 3 miles, The frontage road ended in a T-intersection with a two-lane highway that ran east-west. Raymond turned west, figuring this highway would eventually cross under or over Interstate 40 and provide access. He drove for 7 miles. The highway ran roughly parallel to Interstate 40, which remained visible in the distance to his left, but no crossing or interchange appeared. The landscape was empty desert, sparse vegetation, sandy soil, occasional rock formations, but no buildings, no other roads, no signs of human presence, except for the asphalt beneath his wheels. Raymond's fuel gauge had dropped to under a quarter tank. He was beginning to feel a prickle of real concern. His GPS was showing his position moving across the map, but it wasn't identifying the road he was on. The screen showed him driving through blank terrain between marked highways. He tried his cell phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual in remote areas of New Mexico. But Raymond had a satellite phone for emergencies, a device he'd invested in after a close call with a breakdown in Wyoming years earlier. He pulled the satellite phone from his storage console and powered it on. The device initialized normally, its screen showing the expected startup sequence. But when it finished booting, instead of showing signal strength and network availability, the screen displayed a message Raymond had never seen before. No satellites available. That was impossible. Satellite phones worked anywhere on Earth with a clear view of the sky, which Raymond certainly had in this open desert. The system was designed to be fail-safe, with multiple redundant satellites ensuring constant coverage. A no satellites available message should be impossible unless something was wrong with the orbital network itself. Raymond drove for another 5 miles, his concern evolving into fear. The highway continued endlessly ahead, straight as an arrow, with Interstate 40 remaining visible but unreachable to his left. No exits appeared, no intersections, no buildings, nothing but endless desert and 2 parallel ribbons of pavement that should connect but didn't. His fuel gauge dropped to 1/8 of a tank. Raymond did the mental calculation. At his current rate of fuel consumption, he had perhaps 30 miles of range remaining. If he didn't find an entrance to the interstate or a fuel station within the next 20 minutes, he'd be stranded. He saw something ahead that looked promising. A structure breaking the horizon line. As he approached, Raymond could see it was an overpass. The highway he was on passed beneath Interstate 40. The concrete pillars and steel girders of the overpass, creating a brief patch of shade across the road. Raymond slowed as he approached the underpass. There should be entrance ramps here, he thought. Standard interchange configuration would place them on either side of the overpass. But as he passed beneath Interstate 40, looking up at the underside of the elevated highway, he saw no ramps. The highway he was on simply continued, passing under Interstate 40 without connecting to it. In the shadow of the overpass, Raymond noticed something else. There were vehicles parked on the shoulder, not stopped temporarily, but parked, some of them looking like they'd been there for a considerable time. He counted 5 cars and 2 other semi-trucks, all positioned off to the right side of the highway, beneath the overpass. Raymond slowed to a crawl as he passed the parked vehicles. They were all empty. Some had their doors open. One of the semi-trucks had its hood propped up, as if someone had been working on the engine and had simply walked away mid-repair. 100 yards past the overpass, Raymond saw why the vehicles had stopped there. The highway ended. Not gradually, not transitioning into dirt or gravel, or even deteriorating pavement. The highway simply stopped, the asphalt terminating in a perfectly straight edge. Beyond that edge was desert, but not the normal desert Raymond had been driving through. This was different. The colors were wrong. The light was wrong. The very texture of reality seemed off. It looked like someone had cut the world away with cosmic scissors, leaving a boundary between the normal and the fundamentally wrong. Raymond slammed on his brakes, bringing his truck to a stop about 50 feet from the edge. He sat in his cab, staring at the impossible boundary, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. After several minutes, he put the truck in reverse and backed away from the edge, driving in reverse until he was back under the overpass, parking near the other abandoned vehicles. His fuel gauge was below 1/16 of a tank now. Even if he could find a way back to Interstate 40, he likely didn't have enough fuel to reach the next exit. Raymond got out of his truck and walked to each of the abandoned vehicles, looking for any clue about what had happened to their drivers. The cars offered little information, personal effects scattered on seats, some with keys still in the ignition, all with their batteries long dead. The two semi-trucks were more informative, though in a troubling way. Both trucks had logbooks visible in their cabs. Raymond read through them. The first driver had stopped here on May 12th, 2020, 3 months ago. The final logbook entry read, "Exit 25 NM, can't find way back to I-40, fuel critical, going to walk to interstate and flag down help." The second truck's logbook was dated September 8th, 2019, almost a year ago. The final entry was similar. "Stuck at junction. No way onto interstate, walking north to find help." Raymond felt his fear crystallize into something approaching terror. These drivers had been trapped here just like him, had made the logical decision to walk to the visible interstate to find help, and apparently had never returned to their vehicles. Where had they gone? What had happened to them? He looked north, toward Interstate 40, visible across about 200 yards of desert terrain. He could see vehicles passing, could hear the distant sound of traffic. It would be a simple walk, 15 minutes at most. He could easily flag down a passing vehicle, explain his situation, get help. But something deep in Raymond's survival instinct told him not to. Those other drivers had made that walk and had never come back. There was something wrong with the space between this highway and that interstate, something that wasn't apparent from a distance. Raymond walked to the edge of the highway instead, to that impossible boundary where the road ended. He picked up a rock and tossed it past the edge. The rock sailed normally for about 6 feet, then simply vanished, not landing in the desert beyond, not falling down, vanishing, winking out of existence mid-flight, as if it had crossed through a portal into nothing. He tried again with a larger rock. Same result. Any object that crossed the boundary disappeared completely. Raymond retreated to his truck. He sat in the cab, thinking through his options. He couldn't drive forward. He couldn't walk to the visible interstate. His fuel was nearly exhausted. His communication devices weren't working. And the road that had led him here clearly didn't lead back in the other direction. He'd driven too far for that to be viable with his remaining fuel. He was trapped in a pocket of impossible geography, a place where roads connected to nowhere, and the laws of space and navigation didn't work properly. As Raymond sat contemplating his situation, He heard a sound that didn't belong. Music, faint but distinct. He rolled down his window. The music was coming from somewhere under the overpass, echoing strangely in that shadowed space. Raymond got out and walked toward the sound. It was coming from one of the abandoned cars, a Honda Accord with its door hanging open. As Raymond approached, he could see movement inside the car. There was someone sitting in the driver's seat. Raymond froze. The car had been empty moments ago. He'd looked inside it himself. But now there was clearly a person sitting behind the wheel, their silhouette visible, their hands moving as if adjusting controls. "Hello," Raymond called out. "Do you need help?" The figure in the car didn't respond. It continued making those adjustment movements, hands moving to dashboard controls, head turning slightly as if checking mirrors. The motion was repetitive, mechanical, like watching a loop of someone going through the pre-driving routine. Raymond moved closer, peering through the open door. The person in the driver's seat was a man in his 30s, wearing a button-down shirt and khakis. He was going through the motions of starting a car, turning a key that wasn't there, adjusting mirrors, checking blind spots. Over and over, the same sequence of movements, with no pause or variation. "Hey," Raymond said louder, "can you hear me?" The man's head turned, and Raymond found himself looking into eyes that were completely empty. Not blind, not unfocused, but absent, as if the person these eyes belonged to had departed long ago, leaving only this repetitive shell behind. Raymond backed away quickly. He checked the other abandoned vehicles, dreading what he might find but needing to know. Each one contained a figure now, all of them going through repetitive motions. A woman in a Toyota endlessly adjusting her seatbelt. A man in a Jeep repeatedly checking his phone, which wasn't there. The driver in the other semi-truck, going through the motion of shifting gears over and over, hand moving to a gear shift that wasn't moving. These were the missing drivers. They hadn't walked to the interstate. They'd never left at all. They'd become trapped in loops, endlessly repeating the last actions they'd taken before whatever had happened to them happened. Raymond ran back to his own truck, started the engine, using his remaining fuel be damned, and drove in reverse at dangerous speed back down the highway, away from the overpass, away from those trapped figures. He drove backward for 3 miles, until the overpass was out of sight. Then he carefully executed a turn, pointing his truck back toward where exit 275 should have been. He drove slowly now, conserving fuel, watching carefully. His fuel gauge was on empty, the low fuel warning light glowing amber on his dashboard. At mile 7, Raymond saw something he'd missed before. A dirt road, barely visible, branching off from the highway to the left. It looked like a service road, possibly for maintenance access to Interstate 40. He took the turn. The dirt road was rough, his truck bouncing and shaking as he navigated ruts and rocks. But it led toward Interstate 40, and after half a mile, Raymond saw something beautiful. An entrance ramp, a real one, properly connected to both the surface road and the interstate. His truck's engine sputtered as he accelerated up the ramp. His fuel was exhausted, the engine running on whatever remained in the fuel lines. He merged onto Interstate 40 doing 40 miles per hour, hazard lights flashing, willing the engine to keep running just a little longer. 3 miles west, exit 278. Raymond's engine died as he coasted into a truck stop. The momentum carried him to the fuel islands, where he rolled to a stop. He sat there for several minutes, his hands shaking. his shirt soaked with sweat, despite the air conditioning that had been running. He refueled, called his wife to tell her he loved her, and continued to Phoenix. But Raymond never took exit 275 again. He programmed his GPS to avoid it, and on subsequent runs through New Mexico, he made sure to fuel up long before reaching that section of highway. Sometimes, Raymond thinks about those trapped drivers, endlessly repeating their final actions in abandoned vehicles beneath that overpass. He thinks about the man who'd checked his logbook on May 12, 2020, 3 months before Raymond's own experience. And he wonders how many other drivers are trapped there now, and how many will take exit 275 in the future, looking for a truck stop that isn't there, and finding themselves in a junction that connects to nowhere, with no way back except through impossible geometry and thin dirt roads that might not exist the next time someone looks for them. Story 4. The Passenger. Thomas Brennan was a careful man by nature, a quality that had served him well during his 14 years as a long-haul trucker. At 39 years old, he ran a meticulous operation. His 2019 Kenworth W900 was always spotlessly clean. His logbooks were impeccably maintained, and his delivery record was nearly perfect. He specialized in refrigerated transport, hauling perishable goods across the eastern United States, from dairy products to pharmaceutical supplies. In November 2018, Thomas was contracted to haul a load of frozen seafood from a processing facility in New Bedford, Massachusetts, to a distribution center in Jacksonville, Florida. The route was straightforward: Interstate 95, south through Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, the Carolinas, Georgia, and into Florida. He'd made similar runs dozens of times, and the 20-hour drive held no particular challenges or concerns. Thomas departed New Bedford at 11:30 p.m. on a Thursday night, planning to drive through the night and arrive in Jacksonville late Friday afternoon. The weather was cold but clear, with temperatures in the low 30s. His reefer unit was maintaining a steady -10 degrees Fahrenheit, and his truck was running smoothly. The first 4 hours of the drive were routine. Thomas made a fuel stop at a service area on the New Jersey Turnpike around 3:45 a.m., topped off his diesel tank, used the restroom, and bought a large coffee from a vending machine. He chatted briefly with another driver about road conditions and weather forecasts, then returned to his truck. That's when he saw the man standing near his passenger door. The man appeared to be in his mid-50s, wearing a heavy canvas work jacket, jeans, and work boots. He had a gray beard and wore a baseball cap with a logo Thomas didn't recognize. The man was simply standing there, not approaching other vehicles or walking toward the building, just standing near Thomas's passenger door, as if waiting. "Help you with something?" Thomas called out as he approached his truck. The man looked at him with an expression that seemed tired and sad. "Heading south?" the man asked. "Florida," Thomas confirmed. "Any chance I could catch a ride? I'm trying to get to South Carolina. Been stuck here 2 days trying to find a ride. Can pay for fuel." The man pulled out a wallet and showed a collection of $20 bills. Thomas hesitated. He had a strict personal policy against picking up hitchhikers. Too much liability, too many potential problems, too many horror stories from other drivers about passengers who'd caused trouble. But something about this man seemed genuinely desperate, and South Carolina was on Thomas's route anyway. "Sorry," Thomas said. "Company policy, no passengers." The man nodded, his expression accepting. "I understand. Thank you anyway." Thomas climbed into his truck, started the engine, and began pulling out of the parking space. In his side mirror, he could see the man still standing there, looking more tired and defeated than before. Thomas felt a pang of guilt. It was the middle of the night. The man looked exhausted, and South Carolina was 800 miles of Thomas's route anyway. Against his better judgment, Thomas stopped and rolled down his passenger window. "Look, I can't officially give you a ride, but if you happened to be in my truck when I left, I couldn't exactly force you out, right? I'm not stopping before Florence, South Carolina, though. If that works for you, get in." The man's face showed relief. "Thank you. Really, thank you. Florence is perfect." He opened the passenger door and climbed in, settling into the seat with a deep sigh. "I'm Marcus." "Thomas, like I said, I'm not stopping until Florence. That's probably 8-9 hours from now. You okay with that?" "More than okay. I really appreciate this." They pulled back onto Interstate 95. For the first hour, Marcus was good company. He made pleasant conversation, asked intelligent questions about trucking, shared that he worked construction and was trying to get back to his family in South Carolina after a job had fallen through in Massachusetts. The conversation was normal, friendly, exactly what Thomas would expect from a tired man grateful for a ride. But around 5:15 a.m., as they were passing through Baltimore in early morning darkness, Thomas noticed something odd. He'd just changed lanes, and in the process he'd glanced at his passenger side mirror to check the blind spot. In the mirror's reflection, he could see Marcus in the passenger seat, except Marcus's reflection was looking directly at Thomas, while the actual Marcus beside him was looking out the side window at the passing city lights. Thomas blinked and looked again. Now both the reflection and the real Marcus were looking out the window. Thomas chalked it up to fatigue and the strange lighting conditions of early morning driving. They continued south. Marcus fell asleep around 6 a.m., his head resting against the window. Thomas drove in silence, listening to a news radio station, watching the sun rise over the Atlantic to his right as Interstate 95 carried them through Virginia. At 7:30 a.m., Thomas glanced over at his sleeping passenger and noticed something that made his skin crawl. Marcus wasn't breathing. His chest wasn't moving up and down. There was no subtle movement of his shoulders or rib cage, nothing to indicate respiration. He was perfectly, unnaturally still. Thomas reached over and touched Marcus's shoulder. "Hey, you okay?" Marcus's eyes snapped open immediately. "Yeah, fine. Must have dozed off. How long was I out?" "About an hour and a half." "Good. I needed that." Marcus stretched and yawned, the motion exaggerated and somehow not quite right, like watching an actor perform being sleepy, rather than actually experiencing fatigue. Thomas tried to dismiss his unease. So the guy didn't appear to be breathing while sleeping. People had different sleep patterns, different rates of respiration. And the exaggerated stretch was probably just Marcus being stiff from sleeping in an awkward position. They drove through North Carolina. Marcus made occasional conversation, but something had shifted in the dynamic. Thomas found himself increasingly uncomfortable with his passenger, though he couldn't articulate exactly why. Marcus's comments were still friendly, his tone still pleasant. But there was something off about the timing of his responses, as if he was operating on a slight delay. At 9:40 a.m., Thomas needed to use the restroom. He pulled into a rest area off Interstate 95 in North Carolina. "I'm going to take a quick break," he told Marcus. 10 minutes, max." "I'll wait here," Marcus said. Thomas locked his truck. He always locked it during stops, especially with cargo aboard, and walked to the rest area building. He used the restroom, washed his face to combat fatigue, and bought another coffee from a vending machine. The entire stop took maybe 8 minutes. When he returned to his truck and unlocked the door, Marcus wasn't in the passenger seat. Thomas looked around the parking lot. It wasn't large, maybe 20 parking spaces, most of them empty at this mid-morning hour. He could see the entire area clearly. Marcus wasn't anywhere visible. The man hadn't mentioned needing to use the restroom, and even if he had, Thomas would have seen him walking to or from the building. "Marcus," Thomas called out, feeling foolish. No response. Thomas walked around his entire truck, checking both sides and the rear. No sign of his passenger. He walked to the rest area building, checked inside the restrooms. Empty. He asked a maintenance worker if he'd seen a man in a canvas jacket. The worker said he'd been cleaning for 20 minutes and hadn't seen anyone matching that description. Thomas returned to his truck, confused and slightly relieved. If Marcus had decided to leave for whatever reason, that solved Thomas's growing discomfort with the situation. He climbed into the cab, started the engine, and pulled back onto Interstate 95. As he accelerated up the on-ramp, he glanced at the passenger seat and nearly drove off the road in shock. Marcus was sitting there, exactly as he'd been before, looking out the side window as if nothing had happened. Where did you... "I looked for you," Thomas stammered. Marcus turned to look at him with that same tired expression. "I was here the whole time. You locked the truck, remember? I couldn't get out. But I looked in through the window before I unlocked it. The seat was empty." "Must have been a weird angle," Marcus said. "You know how sometimes reflections and shadows can make spaces look different than they are. I was sitting right here." Thomas's hands were shaking on the steering wheel. He knew what he'd seen. The passenger seat had been empty. Not appeared empty, was empty. He'd looked directly at it, multiple times, from multiple angles. Marcus had not been there. I think maybe I should drop you at the next exit," Thomas said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is getting weird, and I'm not comfortable continuing." "We had an agreement," Marcus said. His tone hadn't changed, still friendly, but there was something underneath it now. Florence, South Carolina. That was the deal. You wouldn't want to break your word, would you, Thomas? "I don't care about the deal. Something's not right here. I want you out of my truck." "I can't do that, Thomas. Not until Florence." Thomas's fear was rapidly converting to anger. "Yes, you can. I'm the driver. This is my truck, and I'm telling you to get out. Next exit, you're leaving, or I'm calling the cops." Marcus turned to look at him fully, and Thomas saw that his eyes were wrong. Not dramatically different, not glowing or black or any of the typical horror movie effects. Just slightly off in their proportions, their placement, as if someone had created a human face from memory, but hadn't quite gotten all the details right. "You can't call the cops, Thomas," Marcus said. "Try your phone." Thomas grabbed his phone from the center console. The screen was black. He pressed the power button. Nothing. The device was completely dead, just like it had been functional moments ago when he'd checked it at the rest stop. "Try your CB radio," Marcus suggested. Thomas reached for the CB microphone. Static hissed from the speaker. He tried multiple channels. Every single one was dead silence. Not even the usual background chatter and interference. "You're starting to understand," Marcus said. "This isn't about me needing a ride to South Carolina, Thomas. This is about you completing a journey. We all have a journey to complete. Mine brought me to that service area in New Jersey. Yours brings you south to Florence. And the terms of the journey are simple. You drive, I ride. And when we reach Florence, we both get what we need." "What the hell are you?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm like you, Thomas. Or I was. I drove trucks for 18 years. Then one night in 2003, I picked up a passenger on Interstate 95 in Maryland. Guy seemed normal enough, said he needed to get to Georgia. I agreed to take him. The ride got strange. Same kinds of things you're experiencing. When we finally reached Georgia, the passenger left, and I continued my delivery. Except I couldn't remember the rest of that trip. I couldn't remember anything after Georgia. When I checked my logbook, there were 3 days missing. 3 days I'd been driving, making stops, having conversations, but I had no memory of any of it." Marcus paused, and when he continued, his voice had a hollow quality. "I kept driving for another 5 years after that. But I was different. People noticed. My wife said I didn't sleep anymore, didn't eat right, moved in strange ways. I told myself they were imagining things. Then one night in 2008, I was sitting at a truck stop in New Jersey, and I realized I couldn't remember why I was there. Couldn't remember my last delivery. Couldn't remember where I was going. All I knew was I needed to go south, needed to find someone heading to South Carolina, needed to complete a journey." "You're dead," Thomas said. "You died, and you're, what? A ghost, haunting Interstate 95. "Dead is such a limiting concept," Marcus said. "I'm between. The road took something from me that night in 2003, and I've been trying to complete my last journey ever since. And you're going to help me, Thomas. You're going to drive me to Florence. And when we get there, I'll be released. The journey will be complete." "And what happens to me?" Thomas asked, though he already suspected the answer. Marcus didn't respond, which was answer enough. Thomas considered his options. He could try to force Marcus out of the truck physically, but something told him that wouldn't work, that Marcus wasn't bound by normal physical laws. He could stop driving entirely, refuse to continue. But they were on Interstate 95, with a full load of perishable cargo, and stopping would cost him his job at minimum. He could drive to a police station or rest area with authorities, but his phone was dead, his CB wasn't working, and he had no way to call for help. He kept driving. What else could he do? The miles crawled past. Marcus sat in the passenger seat, sometimes sleeping that breathless sleep, sometimes staring out the window, occasionally making comments about the landscape or the weather that sounded like they were coming from a very great distance. Thomas tried experiments. He attempted to photograph Marcus with his dash cam, but every image showed an empty passenger seat. He tried to film him with his phone camera. Same result. Whatever Marcus was, he didn't register on electronic recording devices. They crossed into South Carolina at 11:37 a.m. Florence was less than an hour away now. Thomas felt a growing sense of dread. He didn't know what would happen when they reached Florence, but Marcus's story suggested it wouldn't be good for Thomas. At mile marker 164, about 15 miles from Florence, Thomas made a decision. There was an exit ahead with a weigh station. If he could get his truck onto the scales with Marcus inside, maybe the physical act of weighing the vehicle would somehow force Marcus into material existence, make him subject to normal rules. Thomas took the exit and pulled onto the weigh station scales. A uniformed inspector approached the driver's side window. "Morning," the inspector said. "Hauling perishables?" "Yes, sir. Seafood from Massachusetts to Jacksonville." "Go ahead and pop your trailer doors. Quick inspection." Thomas complied, climbing out of the cab and walking to the rear of his trailer with the inspector. They opened the doors, and the inspector verified the cargo and checked the reefer unit temperature. Everything was in order. "You're good to go," the inspector said. "Drive safe." Thomas returned to his cab, his heart sinking. Marcus was still sitting in the passenger seat, completely unaffected by the weigh station or the inspector's presence. The inspector hadn't mentioned seeing a passenger, hadn't asked about him, hadn't even glanced at the passenger seat. To everyone but Thomas, Marcus didn't exist. They pulled back onto Interstate 95. Florence was 10 miles ahead. "Nice try," Marcus said. "I appreciate the creativity. But you can't escape this, Thomas. The road has rules. You picked me up, you agreed to take me to Florence, and that agreement has to be completed. It's bigger than both of us now." "What happens to me?" Thomas asked again. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Honestly, I don't know. For me, my journey ends. I finally get to complete that last drive, deliver that last load, even if it's 15 years late. For you, maybe nothing happens. Maybe you continue on to Jacksonville like normal. And this becomes just a strange memory. Or maybe you become like me. In between, stuck repeating a journey, looking for passengers to help you complete it. The road decides, not me." They took exit 160B toward Florence. Thomas followed the GPS directions to a truck stop off Interstate 95, a large facility with multiple fuel islands and extensive parking. It was busy with midday traffic, dozens of trucks coming and going, drivers fueling up and taking meal breaks. Thomas pulled into a parking space and shut off the engine. He sat there, hands still on the steering wheel, not knowing what came next. Marcus opened the passenger door. "Thank you, Thomas. I mean that. You gave a tired man a ride, and that kindness mattered, even if the circumstances were strange. I hope for your sake the road lets you continue. You seem like a good person." Marcus climbed out of the truck and closed the door. Thomas watched through the passenger window as Marcus walked away through the parking lot, weaving between trucks and cars. As Thomas watched, Marcus began to fade, becoming transparent, his outline becoming less distinct with each step. By the time he'd walked 50 feet, he'd vanished completely, leaving no trace that he'd ever existed. Thomas sat in his truck for 20 minutes, his mind racing. Then he checked his phone. It powered on normally, showing full battery and signal strength. His CB radio was functioning perfectly, the usual trucker's chatter filling the speakers. He called his dispatcher, reported his location and status, confirmed his ETA for Jacksonville. Everything was normal. He completed his delivery later that afternoon, without incident. But 3 weeks later, Thomas realized something was wrong. He couldn't remember the details of his last few deliveries. He'd check his logbook and see entries in his own handwriting, describing trips he had no memory of taking. He'd arrive at destinations and couldn't recall the drive that had brought him there. His wife started making comments about how he seemed distant, how he didn't sleep properly anymore, how sometimes she'd wake up at 3 a.m. and find him just sitting in his truck in their driveway, staring at nothing. 6 months after picking up Marcus, Thomas found himself at a service area on the New Jersey Turnpike at 3:30 in the morning. He couldn't remember the last delivery he'd made. He couldn't remember where he was supposed to be going. All he knew was he needed to go south, needed to find someone heading to South Carolina, needed to complete a journey. He stood near a truck in the parking lot, a clean Kenworth with a refrigerated trailer, and waited for the driver to return. Maybe this driver would give him a ride. Maybe this time, the journey would finally be complete. The driver emerged from the building, approached the truck, and looked at Thomas with suspicion and mild concern. "Help you with something?" the driver asked. Thomas heard himself respond, though the words felt distant, automatic. "Heading south. I'm trying to get to South Carolina. Been stuck here trying to find a ride. Can pay for fuel." And the cycle continued, as it had for Marcus, as it would for Thomas, as it would for every driver who made the mistake of showing kindness on the road and picking up a passenger who was no longer quite human, who existed in the spaces between journeys, forever trying to complete that one last delivery that the road would never let them finish. Story 35. The Repeat. Catherine Wolfe had driven professionally for 11 years, building a reputation as one of the most reliable drivers in her regional network. At 34 years old, she operated as an owner-operator with her own 2017 International Lone Star, primarily hauling agricultural equipment and supplies throughout the Pacific Northwest. She was known for her punctuality, her careful handling of cargo, and her willingness to take on difficult routes through mountain terrain that made other drivers nervous. In February 2019, Catherine was contracted to haul a load of irrigation equipment from a manufacturer in Eugene, Oregon, to a farming cooperative outside of Spokane, Washington. The route required her to travel north on Interstate 5 to Portland, then east on Interstate 84 through the Columbia River Gorge, and finally northeast on Highway 395 to Spokane. The total distance was about 475 miles, which should have taken approximately 8 to 9 hours, including a fuel stop and meal break. Catherine departed Eugene at 7 a.m. on a Thursday morning. The weather forecast was acceptable, overcast with possible rain, but nothing severe. Her truck had been recently serviced, her cargo was properly secured, and her paperwork was in order. She had the day planned down to specific mile markers for fuel and rest stops. The drive to Portland was uneventful. Catherine stopped for fuel at a truck stop on the south side of Portland at 9:12 a.m. She remembered the exact time because she texted her husband with a progress update, mentioning she was making excellent time and would likely arrive in Spokane by mid-afternoon. She merged onto Interstate 84 eastbound at 9:38 a.m., beginning the scenic drive through the Columbia River Gorge. This section of highway followed the Columbia River, with dramatic cliff walls rising on the left and the wide river visible on the right. Catherine had driven this route probably 50 times before and knew it well. The curves requiring reduced speed, the locations of the rest areas, the mile markers where cell phone signal dropped out. At approximately 10:15 a.m., Catherine drove past Crown Point Vista, a prominent viewpoint located at mile marker 25. The distinctive Crown Point structure was clearly visible on the cliff above the highway, a popular tourist destination with its historic observatory tower. Catherine noted it in her peripheral vision, a landmark she always noticed on this route. She continued driving, keeping her speed at the posted 65 miles per hour through the straighter sections and reducing to 55 through the curves. Traffic was light, mostly passenger vehicles with a few other commercial trucks. The overcast sky gave the gorge a moody, atmospheric quality, the cliff walls appearing grey and imposing. At 10:22 a.m., Catherine drove past Crown Point Vista. She noticed it, then did a double take. She'd just passed Crown Point less than 10 minutes ago. That wasn't possible. The highway didn't curve back on itself, didn't loop around. She must have been mistaken about the first sighting, maybe seen a different structure that resembled Crown Point. Except Catherine knew this route intimately. There wasn't another structure that looked like Crown Point, and she was certain she'd seen it at mile marker 25, and now she was seeing it again at what her odometer indicated should be mile marker 31. She checked the mile markers carefully. Sure enough, the next marker she passed read 26, then 27. The sequence was progressing normally, but somehow she'd encountered Crown Point twice. Catherine felt a small flutter of unease, but dismissed it. Maybe she'd been distracted during the first sighting. Maybe she'd misidentified the landmark. She was probably tired and had made a simple perceptual error. At 10:29 a.m., Catherine drove past Crown Point Vista for the third time. Now the unease transformed into concern. This wasn't a perceptual error. She'd seen the same distinctive structure 3 times in 14 minutes, and each time the mile markers had been progressing forward normally. Catherine checked her GPS. It showed her location as moving steadily eastward along Interstate 84, the blue line tracking normally along the highway. She looked carefully at her surroundings, trying to identify any variations or differences. Everything appeared identical to the previous passes. Same cliff formations, same river view, same cloud patterns, same traffic patterns. She made note of specific vehicles around her. A silver Toyota Camry in the right lane ahead of her, a white pickup truck passing her on the left, a RV in the distance behind her. At 10:36 a.m., Catherine drove past Crown Point Vista for the 4th time, and the same vehicles were in the same positions, the silver Camry ahead, the white pickup passing on the left, the RV behind her. "Okay, this is not right," Catherine said aloud. She grabbed her CB radio microphone. "Breaker, breaker. This is the eastbound International hauling irrigation equipment on the 84 through the gorge. Anyone else noticing anything strange about the landmarks? Over." Static answered her. She tried again on different channels. Every channel was silent, not even the usual background traffic and chatter. Catherine tried her cell phone. No signal, which was normal for parts of the gorge, but her phone showed something odd. The clock was reading 10:15 a.m. That was impossible. Her dashboard clock showed 10:38 a.m., and she knew she'd been driving for over an hour since leaving the Portland fuel stop. Her phone's clock should have matched her dashboard, but instead it had somehow gone backward. At 10:43 a.m., Catherine drove past Crown Point Vista for the 5th time. Same vehicles, same positions, same cloud patterns. The fear was growing now, a cold dread settling in Catherine's stomach. She was trapped in some kind of loop, repeating the same 7-minute stretch of highway over and over. The mile markers kept progressing. She'd seen markers 25 through 32 5 times now. But she wasn't actually moving forward through space. She was covering the same ground repeatedly, seeing the same landmarks, passing the same vehicles. Catherine tried various experiments. She changed lanes. She varied her speed, slowing to 50 miles per hour and then accelerating to 70. She turned off at an exit ramp, but the ramp curved back onto the highway, depositing her back into the same traffic flow at the same position. No matter what she did, 7 minutes later, she would pass Crown Point Vista again, and the cycle would repeat. She tried stopping completely. At 10:48 a.m., Catherine pulled onto the shoulder and brought her truck to a complete stop. She engaged her hazard lights and sat there, engine idling, watching the same traffic pattern flow past her. Silver Camry, white pickup, RV in the distance. After sitting for 3 minutes, Catherine noticed something disturbing. The vehicles weren't actually moving past her. They were maintaining their relative positions, even though they appeared to be driving at normal highway speeds. The Camry was perpetually ahead of her, the pickup perpetually passing, the RV perpetually behind. She pulled back onto the highway and accelerated. Within 2 minutes, she was passing Crown Point Vista again, and she was back in the same position in the traffic flow. The Camry ahead, the pickup beside her, the RV behind. Catherine started counting the loops. At 10 loops, her dashboard clock showed 11:09 a.m., meaning each loop was taking approximately 7 minutes. At 15 loops, she tried to communicate with the other vehicles. She pulled alongside the white pickup truck and tried to get the driver's attention, honking her horn and waving. The driver never looked over, never acknowledged her presence, just continued driving at the same steady speed with the same neutral expression. At 20 loops, Catherine tried something desperate. At the highest point of an overpass, she veered sharply to the right, crashing through the guardrail. The impact was massive. Her truck broke through the metal barrier, the cab tilting forward as the front wheels left the pavement, and Catherine felt the sickening sensation of beginning to fall. Then everything reset. Catherine was back in the same position on the highway, the guardrail intact ahead of her, no damage to her truck. It was as if the crash had never happened. 7 minutes later, she passed Crown Point Vista again. At 30 loops, Catherine was screaming. She screamed at the unchanging landscape, at the Crown Point Vista that appeared with mechanical regularity every 7 minutes, at the silver Camry that was always ahead of her, no matter how fast she drove. She screamed until her voice was hoarse, and then she drove in silence. At 47 loops, something changed. A car that wasn't part of the normal pattern appeared. A dark blue sedan in the left lane, driving slightly slower than the standard traffic flow. Catherine stared at it, shocked to see something different after hours of absolute repetition. She pulled alongside the sedan and looked over. The driver was a woman approximately Catherine's age, and she was crying. The woman looked over at Catherine, and their eyes met. In that moment, Catherine understood. This woman was trapped too, had been trapped for God knows how long, repeating her own loop on this same highway. The woman mouthed words that Catherine could read through the window. How long? Catherine held up 4 fingers, then 7. 47 loops, about 5.5 hours. The woman held up both hands, flashing 10 fingers, then 10 again, then 10 again, then 10 again. then 10 again, then 7, 57 times. The woman had been repeating her loop 57 times, nearly 7 hours if her loop was similar in length to Catherine's. Before Catherine could respond, the blue sedan began to fade, becoming translucent, and then it was gone. The traffic pattern returned to normal: silver Camry, white pickup, RV. Catherine passed Crown Point Vista again. At 63 loops, Catherine noticed her fuel gauge. It was reading just under half a tank, exactly the same level it had been reading since the loops began. The fuel wasn't decreasing despite hours of driving. Time was passing. Her dashboard clock was advancing. She was experiencing duration and memory. But physical resources weren't being consumed. At 80 loops, Catherine tried to sleep. She engaged her cruise control and closed her eyes, hoping that unconsciousness might break the cycle. But she couldn't sleep. The moment she closed her eyes, she felt completely alert, unable to drift off no matter how tired she felt. At 99 loops, Catherine began to accept that this might be permanent. She might spend the rest of her existence driving this 7-minute stretch of highway, passing Crown Point Vista over and over, trapped in a loop with no apparent exit. The prospect was terrifying. Not death, but eternal repetition. Consciousness without progression, existence without change. At 103 loops, Catherine saw something impossible. There was a figure standing on the shoulder ahead, a person standing right next to the road, clearly visible in her headlights. Catherine had never seen a pedestrian during any of the previous loops. As she approached, she could see it was an old woman, thin and frail, wearing clothing that looked decades out of date. Catherine slowed as she passed the woman. The old woman raised one hand and pointed directly at Catherine, her mouth moving as if speaking. Catherine couldn't hear the words over her engine noise, but she could read the woman's lips. Exit 35. Take exit 35. Exit 35. Catherine checked her mile markers. She was currently at mile marker 29, which meant exit 35 should appear in the next few miles if the normal highway geometry applied. But Catherine had been driving this loop 103 times. She'd seen mile markers 25 through 32 repeatedly. She'd never seen mile marker 33, 34, or 35. Those didn't exist in her loop. She decided to try. What did she have to lose? 7 minutes later, she passed Crown Point Vista again, but this time she focused intently on the mile markers. 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, and then, for the first time, the markers continued. 33, 34, 35. Exit 35 appeared on her right, an off-ramp Catherine had never seen before, marked with a faded sign that read, "Rest area next right." Catherine took the exit without hesitation, her truck curving down the ramp and away from the highway. The moment she left Interstate 84, everything changed. The overcast sky gave way to clear blue. The temperature jumped from the cold 40 degrees to a warm 70, and the landscape transformed from the gray February gorge to green summer vegetation. The rest area was old and appeared abandoned. Cracked pavement, overgrown landscaping, a weathered building with boarded windows. Catherine pulled her truck into the parking lot and stopped. She sat there, afraid to move, afraid that any action might trap her in another loop. Then she saw the other vehicles. There were 5 of them scattered around the rest area parking lot. Cars and trucks from various decades, all looking like they'd been parked for a very long time. Vegetation had grown around their tires. Rust covered their surfaces. Some had trees growing through broken windows. Catherine got out of her truck. The air smelled of summer, warm grass and dust and distant flowers. She walked to the nearest vehicle, a sedan from the 1970s based on its styling. The driver's door was open. Inside, she found a logbook on the dashboard, its pages yellowed and brittle. The final entry, dated June 14, 1973, read, "Trapped in loop on I-84. Saw woman who pointed to exit 35. Taking the exit. Not sure what happens next, but anything is better than repeating the same 7 minutes forever." Catherine checked the other vehicles. Each one had a similar story. Drivers trapped in loops, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, finally told to take exit 35 by a mysterious figure, and ending up here at this abandoned rest area. Catherine walked back to her truck. Her dashboard clock now read 3:47 p.m., almost 8 hours since she'd first entered the loop at 10:15 a.m. Her phone had signal again. She had 17 missed calls from her husband and her delivery contact in Spokane. She called her husband. He answered on the first ring, his voice frantic. "Catherine, where the hell have you been? I've been trying to reach you for hours." "I'm okay," Catherine said. Something happened on the highway. I'm at a rest area. I'm fine now." "A rest area? Your GPS tracker has been showing you stuck at mile marker 30 on I-84 for the past 8 hours. Dispatch was about to send highway patrol to look for you." Catherine looked at the entrance back to Interstate 84. She could see the highway from here, cars and trucks passing normally in both directions. Taking a deep breath, she got back in her truck, started the engine, and drove back onto the interstate. The highway was normal. She passed Crown Point Vista once, only once, and then the landmarks continued to progress normally. Mile marker 36, mile marker 40, mile marker 50. She drove the rest of the route to Spokane without incident, arriving at 6:30 p.m. She made her delivery, but she filed a report with her company about experiencing mechanical issues that had delayed her. She didn't mention the loops, the repeated landmarks, the blue sedan with the trapped woman, or the abandoned rest area full of vehicles from different decades. But Catherine never drove that section of Interstate 84 again. She programmed her GPS to route her around it, taking Highway 26 or Highway 30 instead, even though those routes added 90 minutes to her Spokane runs. And sometimes, late at night, when she's driving other highways in other states, Catherine sees them. Vehicles that appear in her mirrors and then vanish. Drivers with expressions of confusion and fear. Figures standing on shoulders pointing toward exits that don't quite exist. She sees the trapped ones, the drivers caught in loops, and she knows that somewhere on every major highway there are stretches where time bends, where distance becomes meaningless, where you can drive for hours without moving forward at all. Catherine keeps a note taped to her dashboard now, a reminder she wrote after that day in February 2019. It reads, "If you're trapped, look for the woman. She'll point to an exit. Take it, no matter what." She hopes she never needs to follow her own advice, but she knows the loops are always there, waiting on highways across the country, ready to trap the next driver who passes through at precisely the wrong moment and finds themselves repeating the same 7 minutes of road until someone shows them the way out. Story 6. The Way Station. Daniel Reeves had been in the trucking industry for 27 years, starting as a dock worker and gradually working his way up to owning a small fleet of 4 trucks. At 52 years old, He rarely drove long-haul routes anymore, preferring to manage his business from his office in Des Moines, Iowa. But occasionally he'd take on a special load when his regular drivers were unavailable, or when he wanted to stay connected to the road that had defined most of his adult life. In December 2017, one of Daniel's regular drivers called in sick on short notice, leaving a high-priority load without a driver. The shipment was automotive parts bound from a warehouse in Detroit, Michigan, to a dealership in Denver, Colorado. A time-sensitive delivery with penalty clauses for late arrival. Rather than scramble to find a replacement driver or face the financial penalties, Daniel decided to take the load himself. He departed Detroit at 10:00 p.m. on a Wednesday evening, planning to drive straight through with minimal stops. The route was straightforward. Interstate 94 west through Michigan, around Chicago, across Illinois. Then Interstate 80 west through Iowa, Nebraska, and into Colorado. He'd driven variations of this route hundreds of times over his career. It held no mysteries or concerns for him. The first 8 hours of the drive were completely routine. Daniel stopped for fuel at a truck stop outside of Iowa City at 6:15 a.m., grabbed breakfast and coffee, used the restroom, and was back on the road within 30 minutes. The weather was cold but clear, with temperatures in the low 20s and light traffic on the interstate. As Daniel crossed from Iowa into Nebraska at approximately 8:40 a.m., he noticed a digital highway sign indicating a mandatory wait station ahead at exit 8. The sign read, "All commercial vehicles must enter way station, exit 8, no exceptions." Daniel wasn't concerned. His load was properly documented, his truck's gross vehicle weight was well within legal limits, and his paperwork was in order. He'd been through hundreds of way stations over the years without issue. They were a routine part of commercial trucking, a regulatory checkpoint to ensure trucks weren't overloaded, and their documentation was correct. Exit 8 appeared, marked with multiple signs directing commercial vehicles toward the way station. Daniel took the exit and followed the access road toward the station. The facility appeared old but functional. A large scale built into the pavement, a small building housing the inspection office, several parking spaces for trucks requiring detailed inspections, and the standard signs indicating where drivers should stop and where they should proceed after weighing. What struck Daniel as unusual was the absence of other trucks. Weigh stations on major interstates typically had at least a few vehicles being processed, especially during morning hours when commercial traffic was heavy. But this facility appeared completely empty. No other trucks on the scales, no vehicles parked in the inspection area, no visible personnel. Daniel pulled onto the scale, his truck settling onto the weight platform, with the characteristic slight sinking sensation as the hydraulics registered his vehicle's mass. He waited for the signal light to change, indicating he'd been weighed and could proceed. The light remained red. After 30 seconds, a speaker crackled to life. "Driver of the blue Freightliner, hauling automotive parts, please proceed to Inspection Station 3 for additional verification." Daniel felt a flicker of annoyance, but complied. Inspection Station 3 was a parking space adjacent to the main building, marked with painted lines and a sign indicating where drivers should stop for detailed inspections. Daniel maneuvered his truck into position and shut off the engine. He climbed out of his cab, gathering his paperwork, bill of lading, weight certifications, vehicle registration, commercial driver's license, medical card, logbook. He'd been through random inspections before. They typically took 15 to 20 minutes, while an inspector verified paperwork and performed a basic safety check of the vehicle. Daniel walked to the inspection office door and tried the handle. Locked. He knocked. No response. He walked around the building, looking for another entrance or for any sign of personnel. The building appeared completely deserted. "Hello?" Daniel called out. "I was directed to Inspection Station 3. Anyone here?" Silence answered him. The way station was eerily quiet. No sound of traffic from the nearby interstate. No wind, no birds. Nothing but absolute silence, broken only by Daniel's voice and footsteps. Daniel returned to the scale area and noticed something odd. There was another truck on the scale now, despite Daniel having just walked from there and seeing no vehicles approaching. It was a Kenworth T800, dark green, pulling a flatbed trailer loaded with what appeared to be construction equipment. The truck was positioned perfectly on the scale, engine off, but Daniel could see no driver in the cab. "Hey!" Daniel called out, walking toward the truck. "Driver! You need to check in for inspection." No response. Daniel approached the cab and looked through the window. The interior was empty, but not recently empty. The seats were covered in a layer of dust. The windshield had dead insects accumulated on the inside surface, and there was a general air of abandonment that suggested the vehicle hadn't been occupied in months. Yet it was here, on the scale, positioned perfectly, as if it had just driven into the station moments ago. Daniel walked back to his own truck, his unease growing. He tried his cell phone, no signal. He tried the CB radio, dead silence on all channels. He considered simply leaving, driving his truck back onto Interstate 80, and continuing his delivery, accepting whatever fine or penalty might result from leaving a way station without clearance. He started his engine and began to pull forward. Immediately, a harsh alarm sounded from speakers mounted around the way station, a piercing siren that made Daniel wince and cover his ears. Automated signs lit up in bright red. "Vehicle departure without clearance is a federal offense. Return to inspection station immediately." Daniel stopped his truck. The alarm ceased. The signs went dark. He sat in his cab, trying to think through his situation rationally. He was at a way station that appeared to be abandoned, but was somehow still operating automated systems. He'd been directed to an inspection station, but there were no personnel present. There was another truck here that looked like it had been abandoned for months. And he apparently couldn't leave without some kind of clearance he had no way to obtain. Daniel got out of his truck again and approached the inspection office building more carefully, looking for any detail he might have missed. That's when he noticed the date on a weather-faded permit posted near the door. Nebraska DOT Way Station Number 8, operational through December 31st, 1994. This facility had been decommissioned 23 years ago. Daniel checked the date on his phone, December 7th, 2017. He was at a way station that shouldn't exist anymore, that had been closed for over 2 decades. He walked the perimeter of the facility, looking for some kind of exit route that would bypass the automated detection systems. That's when he saw the other trucks. Behind the inspection building, hidden from view of the main scale area, was a parking lot containing approximately 40 trucks. They were from different eras, different companies, arranged in neat rows as if they'd been deliberately parked and then abandoned. Daniel walked among them reading the license plates, noting the dates on cab permits and inspection stickers. The oldest truck he found had a cab permit from 1987. The newest was from 2016. All of them showed signs of long-term abandonment: flat tires, rust, faded paint, vegetation growing around, and even through some of the vehicles. It looked like a graveyard for trucks, a collection of vehicles that had somehow ended up at this facility and never left. Daniel felt genuine fear now. This wasn't just an administrative error or a weird coincidence. This was something fundamentally wrong, a place that existed outside normal rules and regulations. He returned to the inspection office and tried the door again. This time, it opened. The interior was dark, lit only by dusty windows. Daniel entered cautiously, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The office looked frozen in time: computer equipment from the early 1990s on desks, paper calendars on walls showing dates from 1994, coffee mugs with dried residue that might have been sitting there for decades. File cabinets lined one wall. Daniel opened the nearest one and pulled out a folder. Inside were inspection reports for trucks, all dated in the early 1990s. He pulled out more folders, flipping through them. Every single folder documented a truck that had entered the weigh station for routine inspection and had been flagged for additional verification required. Every single one. Daniel found a folder that made his blood run cold. The truck described in the report was a Kenworth T800, dark green, pulling a flatbed with construction equipment. License plate number matched the truck currently sitting on the scale outside. The inspection date was March 17th, 1994. That truck had been here for 23 years. Daniel frantically searched through more files, looking for any that indicated trucks had been cleared and allowed to leave. He found none. Every inspection report in the filing cabinets ended with the same notation: additional verification required. Vehicle held pending clearance. He heard a sound from outside, an engine starting. Daniel rushed to the window and saw that his own truck's engine was running, though he'd turned it off and taken the keys with him. As he watched, the truck began to move, driving itself toward the parking lot behind the building, where all the other abandoned vehicles sat. Daniel ran from the building, sprinting toward his truck. He grabbed the door handle just as the truck was completing its turn toward the back lot. The door was locked. Through the window, he could see the keys still in the ignition, but the locks had engaged automatically. He pounded on the window. "No, stop. That's my truck." The truck continued its automated journey, pulling into a vacant spot in the parking lot among the other abandoned vehicles. The engine shut off. The lights went dark. Daniel stood there, breathing heavily, staring at his truck that was now apparently trapped in this impossible weigh station graveyard. His cargo, his livelihood, his means of escape, all locked in a vehicle he couldn't access, in a facility that shouldn't exist, in a situation that made no logical sense. He walked back to the scale area. The green Kenworth was gone from the scale. In its place was a different truck, a Peterbilt 379, hauling a dry van, also appearing abandoned and dusty. Daniel checked the cab. Empty, just like the others. A pattern was becoming clear. Trucks entered the scale, were directed to inspection, and then somehow ended up in that back lot. The weigh station was like a trap, a facility designed not to regulate trucking but to capture it, to pull vehicles out of normal time and space and hold them indefinitely. Daniel spent the next hour searching the facility thoroughly, looking for any mechanism that might release his truck or allow him to escape. He found several things of note. First, there was a gate at the far end of the back parking lot, beyond all the abandoned trucks. It was chained shut, but through the gaps Daniel could see that it led to a dirt road that appeared to connect back to Interstate 80, about a mile in the distance. Second, in a maintenance shed behind the inspection building, Daniel found keys. Hundreds of keys, hanging on labeled hooks, each one marked with a vehicle description and date. He found his own keys. The label read, Freightliner, Auto Parts, 12/07/2017. The keys had been in his pocket moments ago. Now they were hanging on a hook, as if the facility itself had reached into his pocket and taken them. Third, in a desk drawer in the inspection office, Daniel found a handwritten note. The paper was old and yellowed, the handwriting shaky. If you're reading this, you're trapped like I was. The station is alive somehow, or cursed, or existing outside normal time. I've been here for 6 weeks, I think. Hard to tell time in this place. The only way out I've found is to leave everything. Your truck, your cargo, your paperwork, everything. Walk to the back gate. Climb over it. Don't look back at your truck, or you'll be pulled back. The dirt road leads to the interstate. Once you reach the interstate, you'll be back in normal time. But your truck will still be here. You'll lose everything except your life. It's a bad trade, but it's the only trade the station offers. The note wasn't signed and had no date. Daniel stood at the chain-link fence surrounding the back parking lot, looking at his truck. 27 years in this industry. His company, his livelihood, his identity all tied up in trucking. That truck represented a significant portion of his fleet's value. The cargo was worth over $80,000. Walking away meant financial ruin, insurance nightmares, potentially the end of his business. But staying meant becoming like those other trucks in the parking lot, trapped in a facility outside time, slowly deteriorating, eternally waiting for clearance that would never come. Daniel made his decision. He climbed the fence, dropped to the other side, and walked toward the back gate without looking at his truck. The gate was secured with a chain and padlock, but the fence on either side was climbable. Daniel scaled it, his 52-year-old muscles protesting but functional. He dropped to the ground on the far side and began walking down the dirt road toward Interstate 80, visible in the distance. With every step, he heard sounds behind him. Engines starting, horns honking, voices calling his name. He knew if he turned around, he'd see his truck, maybe see all the trucks from that parking lot, engines running, waiting for their drivers to return. Daniel didn't turn around. He walked for 20 minutes until he reached Interstate 80. The moment his feet touched the pavement of the interstate shoulder, everything changed. The air felt different, sounds returned to normal. And when Daniel looked back the way he'd come, there was no dirt road, just empty prairie, no sign of the way station or the access road that should have led to it. A highway patrol car pulled up beside him. The officer rolled down his window. "Sir, are you all right? What are you doing walking on the interstate?" Daniel couldn't explain. He told the officer his truck had mechanical trouble, and he'd decided to walk to the next exit for help. The officer gave him a ride to a truck stop, where Daniel called his wife, his insurance company, and his drivers. When he reported his truck stolen, the police investigation found no record of the vehicle entering Nebraska. His GPS tracker showed the truck's last location as Iowa City, where he'd stopped for fuel. It was as if the truck had vanished from the road, somewhere between Iowa and Nebraska. Daniel never found his truck. His insurance eventually paid out after 6 months of investigations and paperwork. He sold his remaining trucks and retired from the industry, taking a desk job with a logistics company. But he still drives Interstate 80 occasionally, and every time he passes mile marker 8 in Nebraska, he looks carefully for any sign of an exit or way station. He's never seen it again. The exit doesn't appear on maps, GPS systems don't identify it, and other drivers look at him like he's crazy when he asks if they've ever stopped at a way station at that location. But sometimes, late at night on empty stretches of highway, Daniel sees trucks that look abandoned, that seem to be driving themselves with no visible drivers, their paint faded and their trailers dusty as if they've been on the road for decades without stopping. And he wonders if those are the trucks that never made it out, the vehicles that are still trapped in that impossible way station, still waiting for clearance to leave, still existing in that pocket of frozen time, where 1994 and 2017, and every year between, exist simultaneously. And Daniel knows that somewhere on Interstate 80 in Nebraska, there's an exit that occasionally appears, marked with signs directing commercial vehicles to a mandatory way station. And if you take that exit, you might never complete your delivery, never reach your destination, never leave that scale where time stopped in 1994 and decided to collect trucks like some strange mechanical harvest that never ends. Story 7. The Fog Line. Marcus Chen had been driving for 19 years, specializing in hazardous materials transport. At 43 years old, he held multiple certifications for handling specialized cargo. Flammable liquids, corrosive materials, compressed gases, and radioactive substances. His work required meticulous attention to safety protocols, precise route planning to comply with hazmat regulations, and a level of professionalism that separated him from general freight haulers. He took pride in maintaining a perfect safety record throughout his career. In September 2021, Marcus was contracted to transport a load of industrial chemicals from a manufacturing facility in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to a processing plant in Little Rock, Arkansas. The cargo consisted of sealed drums of organic solvents, flammable but properly contained and documented according to federal hazmat regulations. The route was straightforward: Interstate 10 west to Lafayette, then U.S. Highway 167, north through Alexandria and into Arkansas, connecting to Interstate 30 for the final stretch into Little Rock. Marcus departed Baton Rouge at 11:00 p.m. on a Friday night, planning to drive through the night and arrive in Little Rock early Saturday morning. The weather forecast was clear, and his truck, a specialized 2020 Peterbilt 5M9 with enhanced safety systems for hazmat transport, had been thoroughly inspected prior to departure. The first 3 hours were routine. Marcus maintained careful speed control, took extra caution with lane changes, and monitored his cargo temperature and pressure sensors regularly. Everything was proceeding according to plan. At approximately 2:15 a.m., as Marcus was driving north on Highway 167, through the rural area between Alexandria and Winfield, Louisiana, he encountered fog. It appeared suddenly, the clear night giving way to thick white vapor that reduced visibility to perhaps 50 feet. Marcus slowed from 65 to 45 miles per hour, activated his fog lights, and increased his following distance from the few other vehicles on the highway. The fog was unusually dense, thicker than any Marcus had driven through before. His headlights reflected off the white wall of vapor, creating a disorienting halo effect. He could barely see the road surface immediately ahead of his truck, and the center and edge lines were visible only as intermittent glimpses through the fog. Marcus considered pulling over to wait for the fog to clear, but finding a safe place to stop with a hazmat load on a rural highway at 2 a.m. would be challenging. He decided to continue at reduced speed, trusting his experience and his truck's safety systems to get him through the fog bank. What concerned him first was the fog's consistency. It wasn't moving or swirling the way normal fog does. It was completely static, like driving through white paint. No patterns, no variations in density, just uniform white opacity. His windshield wipers, which he'd activated to clear moisture, found nothing to clear. The fog wasn't condensing on his windshield the way normal fog does. Marcus checked his GPS. The screen showed his location, but rendered the area around him as blank. No road details, no terrain features, just a blue dot representing his truck on a white background. He'd never seen his GPS display fail to render map details before, even in remote areas. He tried his CB radio, static on all channels. He tried his cell phone. No signal, which wasn't unusual in rural Louisiana, but his phone screen showed something strange. The signal indicator wasn't displaying no signal or searching. It was simply blank, as if the phone couldn't even conceive of the possibility of network connectivity. The fog continued for mile after mile. Marcus checked his odometer. He'd been driving in fog conditions for 15 miles now, which seemed excessive for a localized fog bank. In his experience, fog was patchy, with clear sections alternating with foggy sections. This was continuous, uniform, unchanging. At approximately 2:40 a.m., Marcus noticed he was no longer seeing any other vehicles. He'd been the only northbound traffic for the past 20 miles, and he hadn't seen southbound traffic either. Highway 167 wasn't heavily traveled at night, but complete absence of traffic seemed unlikely. That's when he noticed the fog line. The fog line is the white line at the edge of the highway, marking the boundary between the traffic lane and the shoulder. Drivers often use it as a reference point when visibility is poor, keeping the line visible at the edge of their peripheral vision to maintain lane position. Marcus's fog line was moving. Not subtly, obviously, undeniably moving. The white line at the edge of his lane was slowly shifting left, toward the center of the highway. Marcus blinked and looked again, convinced he was experiencing some kind of visual distortion from staring at fog for too long. But the movement was real. The fog line was migrating across his lane at a rate of perhaps 1 inch per second. Marcus corrected his steering, moving right to keep his truck centered in the lane. But as he did, he noticed the center line was also moving, shifting right toward him, narrowing his lane from both sides. Within 30 seconds, his lane had narrowed from a standard 12-foot width to perhaps 8 feet. His truck, which was 8.5 feet wide including mirrors, had almost no margin for error. "What the hell is happening?" Marcus muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The lines continued to migrate. His lane narrowed to 6 feet, then 5 feet. The white fog line on his right and the yellow center line on his left were now less than 5 feet apart, making it physically impossible for his truck to remain in the lane without touching one or both lines. Marcus tried to switch lanes, But when he looked left, there was no other lane, just the yellow center line, and beyond it, more white fog. No northbound lane, no shoulder, no road at all. The highway had been reduced to the single narrow lane he occupied. He tried slowing down, reducing his speed to 20 miles per hour, hoping the line migration would stop or reverse. Instead, it accelerated. The lines were now moving at several inches per second, rapidly narrowing his available driving space. 4 feet, 3 feet. Marcus's truck was 8.5 feet wide. The lane was now less than 3 feet wide. The physical impossibility of the situation didn't prevent it from continuing. His truck's driver's side somehow remained aligned with the yellow center line, while his passenger side aligned with the white fog line, even though the distance between them was far less than his vehicle's width. It was as if space itself was contracting, compressing his truck in ways that shouldn't be possible. He could hear sounds now, a grinding, creaking sound that seemed to come from all around him, as if reality was being forced into an impossible configuration and protesting the violation. His truck's frame was groaning, metal flexing in ways it shouldn't. But when Marcus looked at his mirrors and down at his truck's body, everything appeared normal. The lines continued to converge, 2 feet apart, 18 inches, 1 foot. Marcus felt pressure on both sides of his body, as if the walls of his cab were pressing inward. He looked down. The cab appeared normal width, but the sensation was undeniable. The driver and passenger doors were pushing toward each other, toward him, slowly crushing him despite no visible change in the cab's dimensions. At 6 inches of lane width, Marcus couldn't see anything but the 2 lines anymore. They filled his entire field of vision, white on the right, yellow on the left, converging slowly but inevitably. The fog beyond them had taken on a quality that Marcus couldn't describe, as if it wasn't just vapor, but something more fundamental, the substance that existed beneath reality when the surface was torn away. 3 inches, 2 inches. The pressure was intense now, Marcus struggling to breathe as space contracted around him. He tried to open his door, but it wouldn't move, not jammed, but simply unable to open into space that no longer existed. He tried to push out his windshield, but his arms moved sluggishly, as if the air itself had become viscous. 1 inch. The lines were about to meet, and Marcus knew with absolute certainty that when they did, he and his truck would be compressed to 0 width, reduced to a mathematical line with no physical dimension, erased from 3-dimensional existence entirely. Then Marcus remembered something from his hazmat training. In emergency situations involving spatial anomalies or dimensional instabilities around radioactive materials, the protocol was counterintuitive. Accelerate toward the anomaly, not away from it. The principle was based on quantum mechanics. Anomalies were thresholds, and passing through them quickly could sometimes allow transition rather than compression. Marcus had never transported radioactive materials without thinking the spatial anomaly protocols were theoretical nonsense. But he had nothing to lose now. He slammed his accelerator to the floor. His truck surged forward, engine roaring, despite the impossible narrowness of the lane. The speedometer climbed, 25 miles per hour, 35, 50, 70. The lines were now less than half an inch apart, but Marcus was accelerating directly into that narrowing space. At 85 miles per hour, the lines met. The white fog line and the yellow center line merged into a single point, directly ahead of his truck. Marcus closed his eyes and held the accelerator down. There was a sound like glass shattering, but impossibly loud, reverberating not through air but through the fabric of space itself. Marcus felt his truck pass through something, not a physical barrier, but a boundary between states of existence. Then silence. Marcus opened his eyes. The fog was gone. He was driving on Highway 167, clear night sky above him, normal visibility. His speedometer read 88 miles per hour. Dangerous speed for a hazmat load. But Marcus eased off the accelerator carefully, bringing his truck back down to 65. His GPS was functioning normally again, showing detailed map data and his position. His cell phone showed 2 bars of signal. His CB radio crackled with distant chatter from other drivers on various channels. Marcus checked his mirrors, half expecting to see something pursuing him from the fog. But behind him was just normal highway, empty of traffic, but appearing completely mundane. He checked his cargo monitors. All readings normal. Temperature, pressure, containment integrity, all within expected parameters. His truck appeared undamaged, showing no signs of the compression Marcus had felt. But when Marcus looked at his dashboard clock, his concern returned. The clock read 5:47 a.m. He'd entered the fog at 2:15 a.m. The entire experience had felt like it lasted perhaps 30 minutes, maybe 40 at most. But according to his clock, 3.5 hours had passed. Marcus pulled his truck to the shoulder and stopped. He needed to verify what had happened, needed to confirm he wasn't experiencing some kind of psychotic break or hallucination. He called his dispatcher. The call went through normally. "Marcus, where have you been? Your GPS tracker dropped offline at 2:17 a.m. and just came back online a few minutes ago. We've been trying to reach you for hours." I hit some fog, heavy fog, lost signal. For 3.5 hours, in the same 30-mile stretch. Marcus, your GPS showed you at mile marker 127 for over 3 hours. We were about to send emergency services to look for you. Marcus checked the nearest mile marker. He was at mile marker 143, 16 miles north of marker 127. But his odometer indicated he'd driven 43 miles since entering the fog. The math didn't work. He'd driven far more distance than his GPS, or his physical location indicated. He completed his delivery to Little Rock, but he filed a detailed incident report with his company's safety department and with the Department of Transportation's Hazmat Division. He described the fog, the converging lines, the loss of time, the spatial compression. The Doughty investigator who reviewed his case told Marcus, off the record, that this was the 17th report of line convergence phenomena on rural highways in Louisiana, Arkansas, and Mississippi over the past 6 years. None of the reports had been made public because the DOT couldn't explain them and didn't want to cause panic among commercial drivers. "Best advice I can give you," the investigator said, "is if you encounter converging lines again, do exactly what you did. Accelerate through. We've had 3 drivers who tried to stop or reverse. 2 of them were never found. Their trucks were located on the shoulder, engines running, cargo intact, but no drivers. The 3rd driver was found, but he wasn't himself anymore." "What does that mean?" Marcus asked. "He'd been compressed," the investigator said quietly. "Not physically, but dimensionally. The doctors couldn't explain it, but he exists in only 2 dimensions now. He can move left and right, up and down, but not forward and backward. He's like a living cardboard cutout. He's in a special facility now, getting care we barely understand how to provide." Marcus never transported hazmat materials through rural Louisiana again. He requested route changes, took on different types of cargo, and eventually transitioned to shorter regional runs that kept him on major interstates. But sometimes, when he's driving at night, Marcus sees it in his peripheral vision, the fog line starting to move, shifting slowly toward the center of the lane, beginning that impossible convergence. When that happens, Marcus doesn't hesitate. He accelerates, punches through the threshold before it can fully form, and emerges on the other side with his truck intact and his dimensions properly configured. And he wonders about those other drivers, the ones who stopped or reversed, the ones who tried to fight the convergence instead of passing through it. He wonders where they are now, in what compressed or altered state they exist, and whether they're conscious of what happened to them, or mercifully unaware that they've been reduced to mathematical abstractions that used to be human beings driving trucks through the American night. Story 8. The Echo Road. Vanessa Morales had spent 12 years building her reputation as a reliable driver, specializing in oversized load transport. At 36 years old, she had the specialized certifications and experience to haul wide loads, tall loads, and super heavy cargo that required route surveys, escort vehicles, and careful coordination with highway authorities. She operated her own Kenworth T880 with a specialized heavy-haul trailer, taking on contracts that many other drivers avoided due to their complexity and regulatory requirements. In July 2020, Vanessa was hired to transport a large industrial transformer from a decommissioned power plant in Casper, Wyoming, to a facility in Billings, Montana, where it would be refurbished and redeployed. The transformer was massive, 43 feet long, 11 feet wide, weighing 67,000 pounds, requiring extensive route planning to identify highways and bridges capable of accommodating its dimensions and weight. The route survey had been completed by the hiring company, and Vanessa had been provided detailed instructions. State Highway 259, north from Casper to Highway 14, then northwest through the Bighorn Mountains to Interstate 90, and, finally, west to Billings. The entire route had been verified for clearances, weight limits, and had been traveled by similar loads multiple times before. Vanessa began the transport at 5 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, accompanied by 2 escort vehicles, one ahead of her truck and one behind, as required for oversized loads. The first 3 hours proceeded smoothly. Her lead escort, driven by a man named Dale, communicated regularly via CB radio about upcoming turns, bridge clearances, and road conditions. Her trailing escort, driven by a woman named Sophia, confirmed that following traffic was being safely managed around the oversized load. At approximately 8:15 a.m., as the convoy was climbing into the Bighorn Mountains on Highway 14, Dale's voice came through the CB. "Heads up, Vanessa. We've got some road construction ahead. Looks like they're doing shoulder work. Should have enough clearance, but take it slow." Vanessa acknowledged and reduced her speed further, crawling along at 15 miles per hour as they approached the construction zone. Orange cones narrowed the highway to a single lane, and construction equipment was visible on the shoulder. A flagman waved them through, and the convoy passed the work zone without incident. But as they emerged from the construction zone, Vanessa noticed something odd. Dale's escort vehicle, which should have been clearly visible ahead of her on the straight section of highway, wasn't there. She looked in her mirrors Sophia's escort vehicle behind her was also gone. "Dale, you copy," Vanessa said into her CB microphone. Static answered. "Sophia, you there?" More static. Vanessa slowed her truck to 10 miles per hour, looking carefully in all directions. The highway stretched ahead and behind her, completely empty. No escort vehicles, no construction equipment, no flagmen, no orange cones. It was as if the construction zone had never existed. Her cell phone showed no signal, which wasn't unusual in the mountains, but her GPS was malfunctioning. The screen showed her position on Highway 14, but the map rendering was wrong. Instead of showing the detailed topographical features of the Bighorn Mountains, it displayed the highway as a simple straight line through blank gray space. Vanessa continued driving slowly, hoping to spot her escort vehicles around the next curve or over the next hill. The highway wound through dense pine forest, the morning sun creating long shadows across the pavement. Everything appeared normal except for the complete absence of her escorts and the lack of any other traffic. At 8:47 a.m., Vanessa passed a distinctive landmark, a large rocky outcropping visible from the highway, shaped somewhat like a profile of a face. She'd noticed it in the route survey photos and had been anticipating seeing it. She noted the time and continued driving. At 8:53 a.m., Vanessa passed the same rocky outcropping again. She was certain it was the same formation, the distinctive profile shape, the particular angle relative to the highway, the specific trees surrounding it. But that was impossible. She'd been driving continuously forward for 6 minutes. She couldn't have circled back to the same landmark. Vanessa pulled her truck to the shoulder and stopped. She got out, walking to the rear of her trailer to verify her cargo was secure and to look for any sign of her escort vehicles. The transformer was properly secured, all tie-downs and chains in good condition. The highway behind her was empty, disappearing around a curve into the forest. She walked to the front of her truck and looked ahead. The highway stretched forward, looking identical to the section behind her. Same width, same surface condition, same forest on both sides. Too identical. It looked less like a natural highway and more like a repeating texture in a video game. The same elements copied and pasted endlessly. Vanessa got back in her truck and continued driving, this time paying careful attention to her odometer. At exactly 8:59 a.m., having driven 0.6 miles from her previous sighting, she passed the rocky outcropping again. "Okay," Vanessa said aloud, forcing herself to think logically. "I'm in some kind of loop. Road curves around, brings me back to the same point. Happens in mountains sometimes. Switchbacks that feel like you're making progress, but really you're circling." But Vanessa had studied the route survey carefully. This section of Highway 14 had no switchbacks, no tight loops. It was a relatively straight northwest trajectory through the mountains. She tried a different approach. At the next passing of the rocky outcropping, 9:05 a.m., Vanessa stopped her truck directly beside the formation. She got out and physically touched the rock, confirming it was real and solid. Then she took a red marker from her cab and drew a large X on the pavement next to the outcropping. She got back in her truck and drove forward, watching her odometer carefully. At 0.6 miles, the outcropping appeared again. Vanessa looked at the pavement beside it. No red X. The road surface was clean and unmarked. "Different road," Vanessa whispered, "or different iteration of the same road." She repeated the experiment. This time she placed a physical object, a road flare from her emergency kit, on the highway beside the outcropping. She drove forward 0.6 miles. The outcropping appeared. No flare on the road. Vanessa began to understand the nature of her situation. She wasn't traveling in a circle. She was traveling forward normally. But every 0.6 miles the environment reset to the same starting configuration. She was passing through different versions of the same stretch of road, each one identical to the last. An infinite series of repetitions extending forward forever. At 9:34 a.m., Vanessa noticed something that increased her fear significantly. Her fuel gauge had dropped from 3/4 full to just under half full. She'd been driving for less than 90 minutes since her last fuel stop, mostly at reduced speeds, towing a heavy load, but not consuming fuel at an excessive rate. The fuel loss was more than twice what it should have been. She did the calculation in her head. She'd passed the rocky outcropping approximately 37 times. Each repetition was 0.6 miles. That meant she'd effectively traveled 22 miles. But her odometer showed she'd traveled only 5 miles from the construction zone. Distance and fuel consumption weren't matching, as if some of her travel was happening in a dimension that affected her fuel tank, but not her odometer. At 10:12 a.m., having passed the outcropping 58 times, Vanessa's fuel gauge showed 1/4 tank. At this rate, she'd run out of fuel after perhaps another 40 repetitions, which would leave her stranded in this repeating section of highway, with no means of calling for help, and no prospect of encountering other vehicles. Vanessa tried various experiments. She drove in reverse. The scenery remained identical, suggesting the repetition occurred regardless of direction. She turned her truck around completely and drove back the way she'd come. After 0.6 miles, she encountered the outcropping again from the other direction. She tried driving off the highway into the forest. Her truck made it about 30 feet into the trees before encountering an invisible barrier. Not a physical wall, but a boundary where the truck's forward momentum simply stopped, as if she'd run out of space to move into, even though the forest appeared to continue ahead. At 11:07 a.m., with her fuel gauge showing less than 1/8 of a tank, Vanessa made a decision born of desperation. She'd noticed that each repetition wasn't quite perfect. There were tiny variations, a slightly different shadow angle, a bird visible in one iteration but not the next, infinitesimal differences in cloud positions. What if the point was to identify the right iteration, to find the specific version of this road segment that connected to normal reality instead of looping endlessly? Vanessa began examining each iteration carefully as she passed through it, looking for any variation that seemed significant. On the 73rd iteration, she noticed that the rocky outcropping had a small bird perched on it. A hawk or falcon. She couldn't identify the species from her moving truck. She hadn't seen a bird on the outcropping in any previous iteration. On impulse, Vanessa honked her horn as she passed the bird. The bird took flight, launching itself from the rock and flying parallel to her truck. Instead of veering off into the forest as she expected, the bird stayed alongside her truck, matching her speed. Vanessa followed the bird. After 0.6 miles, she expected to see the outcropping again, but this time something different appeared ahead. A junction. Highway 14 continued northwest, but a side road branched off to the left, unmarked and unpaved, disappearing into the forest. The bird turned toward the side road. Vanessa hesitated. Taking an unmarked road with an oversized load, without escort vehicles, in terrain she hadn't surveyed, violated every safety protocol she followed. But staying on the repeating highway meant running out of fuel and being stranded indefinitely. She turned onto the side road, her truck bouncing and swaying as it transitioned from smooth pavement to rough dirt and gravel. The road was barely wide enough for her truck, tree branches scraping against her trailer on both sides. Her load clearances were marginal. Any significant overhead obstruction would trap her. The bird continued ahead of her, visible in her headlights in the forest gloom. Vanessa drove for what felt like hours, but was probably only 15 minutes, the dirt road winding through increasingly dense forest, until she emerged into a clearing. In the clearing was a small building, a ranger station or maintenance shed of some kind, and parked beside it were her 2 escort vehicles. Dale and Sophia were standing next to their trucks, looking relieved when they saw Vanessa emerge from the forest. Vanessa parked her truck and climbed out, her legs shaky from adrenaline. "What happened? Where did you go?" Dale looked confused. "Where did we go? You disappeared. 1 minute you were right behind me, coming through the construction zone. The next minute you were gone. We turned around, drove back and forth for an hour looking for you. We were about to call emergency services when we ended up here. And this ranger," he gestured toward the building, "said you'd be arriving shortly." "Ranger?" Vanessa asked. The building's door opened, and a man stepped out. He appeared to be in his 60s, wearing what looked like a park ranger uniform, but without any identifying patches or insignia. "Welcome back," the ranger said. "You found your way out. Not all drivers do." "What is this place?" Vanessa asked. "What happened back there on the highway?" "Echo Road," the ranger said simply. "It's what we call it. A section of highway that split off from normal reality sometime in the 1980s. Trucks pass through it occasionally, especially large loads that create gravitational or spatial distortions. Most loops last only a few minutes. You were in there for over 3 hours by external time, which is longer than usual. Must have been the transformer. That much dense mass probably deepened the distortion." "That's impossible," Vanessa said. "Roads don't split from reality. That's not how physics works." The ranger smiled, a tired expression. "You're right. It's not how physics works. But it's how the roads work sometimes, especially in places where they were built through difficult terrain, using methods we'd consider unsafe today. Sometimes the shortcuts we take when building infrastructure create longer problems. Echo Road is one of those problems. The state knows about it, but can't fix it because they can't consistently locate it." "How do I get back to normal Highway 14? Vanessa asked. "Follow the access road behind this station. It'll take you about 2 miles north, and you'll merge back onto Highway 14 at mile marker 87. You'll have lost about 4 hours by your clock, but you'll be back in normal time and normal space." The ranger gave them directions, and the convoy, Vanessa's truck and her 2 escort vehicles, followed the access road as instructed. 2 miles later, they emerged onto Highway 14, exactly where the ranger had indicated. The transition was seamless, the road looking completely normal, traffic visible in both directions. Vanessa completed her delivery to Billings without further incident, but she filed a detailed report with the Wyoming Department of Transportation about the experience. The DOT representative who interviewed her confirmed that several similar reports had been filed over the years about sections of Highway 14 in the Bighorn Mountains, always involving large or heavy loads, always describing repetitive landscape and time distortions. We've sent surveying crews into those areas dozens of times, the representative told her. They never find anything unusual. Standard highway, standard terrain. Whatever triggers the Echo Road phenomenon only activates under specific conditions we haven't been able to identify or replicate. Vanessa continued hauling oversized loads, but she avoided routes through the Bighorn Mountains on Highway 14. Other routes were available, even if they added time and distance to her deliveries. The surcharge she could charge for mountain routes wasn't worth the risk of ending up in another Echo Road scenario. But sometimes Vanessa thinks about that ranger and his small station in the clearing that shouldn't have existed. She wonders if he's real, or if he's part of the Echo Road phenomenon itself, a guide embedded in the distortion to help lost drivers find their way out. She wonders how many drivers have passed through Echo Road and never found that side road with the bird guiding them. How many trucks are still repeating that point? 6-mile segment, fuel gauges dropping toward empty, drivers growing increasingly desperate as they realize they're trapped in an infinite loop with no visible exit. And when Vanessa sees birds flying alongside highways now, especially hawks and falcons, she watches them carefully to see if they maintain pace with her truck just a little too long, as if they're not just birds, but guides waiting to show lost drivers the hidden roads that lead back to reality, from the places where the highways split and loop and echo endlessly through terrain that exists outside normal space and normal time.